On Christmas, I arrived earlier than planned at the party at my wife's parents' house. I was shocked when I heard my wife say, "I am 3 weeks pregnant for my boss. He's about to be a father." I left quietly. 3 weeks later, everyone went pale when they do say. I should have known something was wrong when Sarah insisted I take the scenic route. The highway's probably packed. She'd said that morning, her fingers dancing across her phone screen while I loaded the last of the Christmas gifts into our SUV. "Everyone's traveling today. Take Riverside Drive instead." I'd nodded, distracted by the thought of her parents' annual Christmas Eve gathering, the forced small talk, her mother's pointed questions about grandchildren, her father's firm handshake that always lasted a beat too long. 23 years we've been doing this dance. 23 Christmases of pretending we were the couple everyone thought we were. The scenic route added 40 minutes to our drive. I remember thinking it was strange that Sarah didn't complain once about the detour, even when we hit construction near the old mill. She just kept scrolling through her phone, smiling at something I couldn't see. Her fingers moving with the kind of urgency that suggested the conversation on the other end mattered more than anything happening in our car. "Work?" I'd asked. She didn't look up. "Oh, yeah. Just some year-end stuff Marcus needs sorted out." Marcus, her boss. I'd heard that name approximately 700 times in the past 6 months, always delivered with the same breathless reverence people reserve for celebrities or saints. Marcus thinks this. Marcus said that. Marcus is revolutionizing the industry. I'd met him once, at the company holiday party in early December. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit that probably cost more than our mortgage payment. He'd shaken my hand with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life, and when he'd looked at Sarah, there was something in his eyes that made me want to stand between them. But I didn't, because that's not who I am. I'm Michael Chen, the reasonable one, the even-tempered one, the one who teaches high school history and coaches JV basketball and comes home every night to a wife who increasingly feels like a stranger wearing Sarah's face. The construction cleared, the road opened up, and I drove us toward the Christmas Eve I thought we'd be having, while Sarah planned something else entirely. We arrived at her parents' house at 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes earlier than we'd planned, thanks to my decision to skip the last section of the scenic route and jump back on the highway. I'd glanced at Sarah as I pulled into the circular driveway, expecting her to gather her things, but she was staring at her phone with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. "Michael," she said, her voice strange and tight. "Can you go in first? I need to make a quick call. Work emergency." It was Christmas Eve. What kind of emergency could possibly... But I didn't ask, because asking would have required me to acknowledge that something was fundamentally wrong, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not on Christmas Eve. Not with her entire family waiting inside that house with its warm lights and wreaths on every door and the smell of her mother's famous cinnamon rolls probably already filling the air. So, I nodded. I got out of the car. I walked up those stone steps carrying our carefully wrapped gifts, and I opened the front door to the sound of laughter and Christmas music and the life we were supposed to be living. "Michael." Her mother, Patricia, swept toward me with her usual theatrical grace, arms outstretched. "You're early." "Where's Sarah?" "Taking a work call. She'll be right in." Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in the performance that suggested she knew more than she was saying. But then she recovered, as she always did, and ushered me deeper into the house, where Sarah's father, Robert, was holding court by the fireplace, talking to Sarah's brother David and his wife Amanda. I made the rounds, shook hands, accepted hugs, answered the same questions I'd been answering for 2 decades. Yes, school's going well. Yes, the basketball team has a real shot this year. No, we're not traveling anywhere for the holidays. The same script, the same staging, the same careful choreography we'd all learned to perform. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but really I was going to check on Sarah. Maybe the call was taking longer than expected. Maybe she needed help carrying in the gifts we'd left in the car. Maybe I was looking for a reason to leave the performance for a moment and remember how to breathe. I walked back toward the foyer, past the formal dining room where Patricia and Amanda were setting out appetizers, past the study where Robert kept his impressive collection of first edition books he'd never actually read. The house was massive, one of those old Victorian estates that Sarah had grown up in, the kind of place where you could get lost if you didn't know which hallway led where. That's when I heard her voice. She was in the sunroom, the glass-walled addition off the back of the house where Patricia kept her orchids and hosted her book club meetings. The door was slightly ajar, and through it I could hear Sarah talking to someone. Not on the phone, in person. I should have announced myself, should have called out, made some noise, given her the courtesy of knowing I was there. But something in her tone stopped me. It was the voice she used to use with me, back when we were 22 and believed in forever. Soft, intimate, full of secrets, meant for only one other person to hear. I know, she was saying, and she was laughing, actually laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. But we have to tell them eventually. We can't keep hiding this. My hand found the door frame. My heart was doing something strange in my chest, a stuttering rhythm that suggested my body knew what was coming before my brain could process it. Tonight? A male voice. Marcus. Are you sure? It's Christmas Eve. That's what makes it perfect, Sarah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Everyone's here. Everyone's in a good mood. And honestly, I'm tired of keeping secrets. I want to celebrate this. I want everyone to know. There was a pause, the sound of movement. And then Marcus spoke again, his voice lower now, tender in a way that made something inside me crack. You're absolutely sure about this? I'm 3 weeks pregnant, Marcus. The words hung in the air like snow that hasn't decided whether to fall or float. I'm 3 weeks pregnant for my boss. He's about to be a father. I don't remember stepping back. Don't remember the exact moment my hand left the door frame, or the exact sequence of movements that carried me away from that door, down that hallway, past the formal dining room where Patricia was explaining the difference between Spanish olives and Italian ones. I don't remember retrieving my coat from the closet, or finding my keys, or making whatever excuse I made to whoever asked where I was going. What I remember is this. The cold air hitting my face when I stepped outside, the way my hands shook when I started the car, the absolute crystalline silence inside my head as I drove away from that house with its warm lights and Christmas music and the sound of my wife's laughter echoing in my ears. I drove for 2 hours without destination, just following roads I half remembered from my childhood in this town, past the elementary school where Sarah and I had met at a community fundraiser 25 years ago, past the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, past the small Catholic church where we'd gotten married on a June afternoon that felt like it belonged to different people in a different lifetime. The streets were empty. Most families were inside their homes, gathering around trees and fireplaces, building memories they'd talk about for years. And I was out here, driving through the dark, trying to understand how I'd missed the signs, except I hadn't missed them, had I? The late nights at the office, the new clothes, the way she'd stopped reaching for me in bed, stopped asking about my day, stopped being present in all the small ways that marriages are built on, the way she said Marcus's name. I'd seen it all. I'd just chosen not to see what it meant. My phone buzzed. Once, twice, a dozen times in rapid succession. I didn't look at it, couldn't bear to see what excuses or explanations or accusations might be waiting there. Instead, I drove until I found myself at Riverside Park, the same park where Sarah and I used to bring our dog before he died 3 years ago. I parked in the empty lot and sat there, watching the moon reflect off the frozen pond, and I let myself feel everything I'd been refusing to feel for months. The anger came first, hot and sharp and righteous. How dare she? How dare they? In her parents' house, on Christmas Eve, planning their announcement like it was something to celebrate? Then came the grief, heavy and suffocating, for the life I thought we had and the future I'd believed we were building. And finally, underneath it all, came something else, something colder and clearer and infinitely more dangerous than anger or grief, clarity. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could see the situation exactly as it was. Not through the lens of hope or denial or the desperate desire to make it work, just the plain, unvarnished truth. My wife was pregnant with her boss's child. She was planning to announce it tonight at Christmas Eve dinner, surrounded by her family. She'd sent me ahead on a longer route to give herself time to arrive early and rehearse with Marcus. She'd probably planned the whole thing, right down to the timing and the audience. And she'd assumed I would just, what, accept it? Play along? Raise another man's child because that's what good, reasonable Michael Chen would do? I sat in that parking lot until my phone stopped buzzing, until the moon rose higher in the sky, until the cold seeped through my coat and reminded me I was still alive, still here, still capable of making choices. Then I started the car and drove home, not to her parents' house, home, to the 3-bedroom colonial we'd bought 5 years ago in a neighborhood full of young families and retired couples. Home to the mortgage I'd been paying and the lawn I'd been mowing and the gutters I'd cleaned out just last weekend. I packed a bag. Not everything, just enough for a few weeks. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop. The photo album from the trip Sarah and I took to Japan on our 15th anniversary, when we'd promised each other we'd travel more, be more intentional, really work on us. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker she'd given me for my last birthday. And then I left. I checked into a hotel downtown, one of those extended stay places that cater to business travelers and people whose lives have temporarily fallen apart. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed me a key card and pointed toward the elevators. Room 412, a space that wasn't mine and wasn't Sarah's. Neutral territory. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally looked at my phone. 47 text messages, 19 missed calls, all from Sarah. I opened the messages. The first few were casual. Where did you go? Then concerned. Michael, everyone's asking where you are. Is everything okay? Then, frantic. Please answer your phone. I'm worried. And finally, sent just 20 minutes ago. We need to talk. I know you heard something. It's not what you think. I almost laughed at that last one. It's not what you think. The oldest line in the book. The go-to response when someone's been caught doing exactly what they've been accused of doing. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. What was there to say? What words existed that could bridge the gap between the man who'd walked into that house at 6:47 p.m. and the man sitting in this hotel room now? Finally, I settled on something simple. I heard everything. Don't contact me again until you're ready to tell the truth. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. Then I turned off my phone, lay back on the unfamiliar bed, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally found me. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow, Sarah's family would gather around the table and realize I wasn't coming back. Tomorrow, they'd have to figure out how to explain my absence. Tomorrow, Sarah would have to decide whether to tell them her news without me there to witness it. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was choosing myself, and I had 3 weeks to figure out what came next. I woke to silence. Not the comfortable silence of a Sunday morning when Sarah would sleep late and I'd make coffee and read the paper in our kitchen while sunlight streamed through the windows. This was different, heavier. The kind of silence that exists in the space between your old life ending and your new one beginning, when you're suspended in that terrible moment of knowing everything has changed but not yet understanding what it means. The hotel room was dark except for a thin line of light seeping through the gap in the blackout curtains. My phone, still off, sat on the nightstand like a landmine I wasn't ready to detonate. I knew what would be waiting there. More messages, more calls, more attempts to control the narrative before I could process what the truth actually was. I lay there for a long time, watching that line of light grow brighter as morning arrived, and I let myself think about the details I'd been too shocked to fully register last night. 3 weeks pregnant. The timeline played out in my head with the brutal clarity of someone who'd been teaching critical thinking for 2 decades. 3 weeks ago was the first week of December, the company holiday party. The night Sarah had come home at 2 a.m., smelling like expensive wine, and telling me about how Marcus had insisted everyone stay late to celebrate hitting their quarterly targets. I'd been asleep when she'd slipped into bed, had barely stirred when she'd gotten up the next morning and showered for 45 minutes. Had that been the night, or had there been others? How long had this been going on? The questions multiplied, like cells dividing. each one spawning new ones until my head felt crowded with scenarios and possibilities, and the desperate need to know exactly when my marriage had ended, as if pinpointing the moment would somehow make it hurt less. I forced myself out of bed, showered, dressed in the clothes I'd hastily packed, jeans and a sweater that Sarah had given me 2 Christmases ago, back when we still did that dance of thoughtful gift-giving and gratitude. It was 7:23 a.m. on Christmas morning. Somewhere, children were waking up to stockings and presents, and parents who were still pretending the magic was real. Somewhere, Sarah was probably sitting in her childhood bedroom, or maybe in the guest room Marcus had presumably stayed in, trying to figure out how to explain where her husband had gone. I turned on my phone. The messages came flooding in immediately, a digital avalanche of concern and confusion and carefully worded attempts to gauge what I knew and what I didn't. But it wasn't Sarah's messages I focused on first. It was the one from her brother David, sent at 11:47 p.m. "Hey man, Sarah's worried sick. She said you left without explanation. Everything okay? Call me when you can." So she hadn't told them, hadn't explained why I'd disappeared. Was still playing the role of concerned wife, wondering where her husband had gone, performing confusion for an audience that didn't yet know they were watching a performance. I scrolled through the rest. Patricia had sent 3 messages, each more insistent than the last, demanding I call immediately. Robert had sent one. "This is unacceptable behavior on Christmas Eve. We expect better from you. We expect better from you." I almost laughed. Almost called him right then and told him exactly what his daughter had been doing, who she'd been doing it with, and how she'd planned to announce it at his dinner table. Almost asked him if that met his standards for acceptable behavior. But I didn't, because that would have been reactive, emotional. The old Michael, the one who taught conflict resolution and believed in open communication and the power of honest conversation to heal any wound. This Michael, the one sitting in a hotel room on Christmas morning, reading messages from people who thought they knew the whole story. This Michael was learning a different lesson. Silence is power. Every moment I didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't defend myself, was a moment they had to sit with their uncertainty. Every hour that passed was another hour. Sarah had to maintain her performance, had to answer questions about where I'd gone and why, had to keep her secret while watching her family's suspicion grow. I wasn't ready to give her the relief of my response. Instead, I opened my laptop and did what I do best. I researched. Divorce in our state required 6 months of separation before it could be finalized. Property would be divided equitably, not equally, meaning the court would consider who contributed what to the marriage. We had a joint checking account, joint savings, the house in both our names. Sarah made more than I did, significantly more, since her promotion to VP 3 months ago, but I'd been the one managing our finances, paying the bills, making sure we stayed within budget while she focused on her career. Her career with Marcus. I pulled up Sarah's company website, looked at the executive page where Marcus's photo smiled at me with that same confident expression I remembered from the holiday party. Chief Operating Officer. Married, according to the brief bio. 2 adult children. Married. Did his wife know? Was she sitting somewhere this morning? Maybe opening presents with those adult children, believing her husband was away on business or visiting family? Or maybe she already knew. Maybe this was a pattern for Marcus, the powerful executive who saw young talent and decided to cultivate it in ways that had nothing to do with professional development. I found Sarah's LinkedIn profile next, scrolled through her posts from the past 6 months. There he was, tagged in almost everything. Photo after photo of company events, conferences, team celebrations. And in every single one, Sarah was standing just a little too close, smiling just a little too wide. Her body language speaking volumes I'd been too trusting to read. The evidence had been there all along. I'd just chosen not to see it. I took screenshots, saved them to a folder I titled Documentation, opened a new document, and started writing down everything I could remember from last night. The conversation I'd overheard, the timeline, the exact words Sarah had used. "I'm 3 weeks pregnant for my boss. He's about to be a father." Not, "We're pregnant." Not, "I'm having a baby." The possessive language was deliberate, claiming the pregnancy as something she was doing for him, giving to him, creating with him. I was methodical about it, detailed. Every teacher instinct I had went into documenting the facts as I knew them, creating a record that couldn't be disputed or reinterpreted later. When Sarah tried to convince me I'd misunderstood, I'd taken things out of context. I'd overreacted to something innocent. By 10 a.m., I had 5 pages of notes, and a growing sense that I needed help navigating this. Not the emotional kind, I'd deal with those feelings in my own time, but the practical kind, the legal kind. I searched for divorce attorneys in the area. Found one whose website emphasized her experience with high-conflict divorces and infidelity cases. Margaret Thornton, Esquire. Her office was closed for the holiday, but there was an emergency contact line. I didn't call. Not yet, because calling an attorney would make this real in a way I wasn't quite ready for. It would transform this from something that had happened to me into something I was actively doing, and I needed another day or two to sit with that distinction. My stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. The hotel had a continental breakfast, so I went downstairs, filled a plate with food I didn't really want, and sat in the empty dining area watching families check out exhausted parents with overexcited children. Elderly couples moving slowly but deliberately. Everyone heading somewhere for Christmas dinner. Rough night? The voice came from my left. A woman, maybe early 50s, sitting alone at a nearby table with coffee and what looked like the hotel's excuse for a croissant. I must have looked as bad as I felt. Something like that, I said. She nodded, the kind of understanding nod that suggested she'd had her own rough nights and knew better than to pry. Holidays are hard. Whatever it is, you'll get through it. How do you know? She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. Because you're here. You're eating breakfast. You're still showing up for yourself. That's more than a lot of people manage. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. 2 strangers spending Christmas morning in a hotel dining area because their real lives had become temporarily uninhabitable. I'm Janet, she said eventually. Michael. Well, Michael, I hope whatever brought you here gets better soon. And if it doesn't get better, I hope you get stronger. She left before I could respond, taking her coffee and her sad smile with her. I sat there for another hour, watching the families come and go, and I thought about strength, about what it meant to get stronger when everything you'd built your life around had just collapsed. When I returned to my room, I finally opened Sarah's messages. There were 63 now. I scrolled to the most recent one, sent just 20 minutes ago. Michael, please, I know you're reading these. I know you're hurt, but you need to let me explain. What you heard, it wasn't the whole story. There's so much you don't know. Please, just come back so we can talk. Everyone's worried. Mom's barely holding it together. Dad's talking about calling the police to file a missing person report. This isn't fair to them. Whatever you think is happening, you're wrong, please. I read it 3 times, analyzing each sentence the way I'd teach my students to analyze historical documents, looking for what was being said and what was being carefully avoided. She didn't deny the pregnancy. She didn't deny it was Marcus's. She just claimed there was more to the story, that I was wrong about something, that I needed to come back and let her explain. And she was using her parents' distress as leverage, suggesting that my absence was the problem, not her betrayal, making me responsible for their emotional state, for the disruption of their holiday, for the awkwardness of having to explain where I'd gone. It was manipulation wrapped in concern, and I could see it clearly now that I wasn't standing in the middle of it. I typed a response. I'm safe. I need time to process what I heard. If you want to tell your parents the truth about why I left, that's your choice. But I won't be the one to protect you from the consequences of your decisions anymore. I sent it and immediately turned off my phone again. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a strange, liminal state. I went for a long walk through downtown, past closed shops and empty streets, the only sound my footsteps on cold pavement. I found a Chinese restaurant that was open, because, of course it was, that cliché of American holidays, and ate dumplings while sitting at a table for one, surrounded by other people who'd found themselves outside the traditional family Christmas for various reasons. Nobody asked questions. Nobody expected explanations. It was, in its own way, The most honest Christmas I'd had in years. I returned to the hotel as evening fell, turned my phone back on long enough to see that Sarah had called 17 times and sent another dozen messages, each one more desperate than the last. Her mother had called 6 times. David had texted asking if I needed anything, if there was something going on he should know about. And there was one message from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Chen, this is Marcus Westfield. I understand there's been some confusion. I think it's important we speak directly. Please call me at your earliest convenience. The audacity of it made something cold settle in my chest. He wanted to speak directly. Wanted to manage the situation. Control the narrative. Probably spin some story about how this wasn't what it looked like, how I'd misunderstood, how he and Sarah were just close colleagues, and whatever I'd heard had been taken out of context. I saved his number, didn't respond, added it to my growing documentation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in the dark thinking about all the moments I'd missed, all the signs I'd ignored, all the times I'd chosen to believe Sarah when some part of me had known she was lying. The late nights that became later. The new lingerie I'd found in her drawer that she'd never worn for me. The way she'd started going to the gym at 5 a.m. instead of after work. The mysterious bruise on her collarbone she'd blamed on walking into a cabinet. The distance that had grown between us so gradually, I'd convinced myself it was just the natural evolution of a long marriage, the comfortable settling that happened when you'd been together for 2 decades. I'd been so good at lying to myself, but I was done with that now. At 2 a.m., wide awake and clear-headed in a way I hadn't been in months, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Sarah. Wasn't going to demand explanations or answers or the truth she clearly had no intention of telling me. I wasn't going to give her the opportunity to spin her story, to cry and apologize and promise it meant nothing, to beg me to understand how complicated everything had become. Instead, I was going to document everything, gather evidence, build an airtight case, and then, when I had all the facts and understood exactly what I was dealing with, I would act. Not from emotion, not from pain, but from a position of absolute clarity about who Sarah really was and what she'd really done. I spent the next 3 hours making plans. Lists of things I needed to do, people I needed to talk to, information I needed to gather. By the time the sun started to rise on the day after Christmas, I had the outline of a strategy. Step 1. Find out exactly how long this affair had been going on. Step 2. Determine if Marcus's wife knew about the pregnancy. Step 3. Understand the full financial picture of our marriage and what divorce would mean. Step 4. Document everything in a way that couldn't be disputed or denied. Step 5. Wait. Because the best revenge isn't hot and immediate. It's cold and calculated and perfectly timed. It's giving people enough rope to hang themselves with while you stand back and watch them tie the knots. Sarah wanted to announce her pregnancy, wanted to celebrate this new chapter of her life, wanted to introduce Marcus as the father of her child, and expect everyone to be happy for her. Fine. Let her have her moment. Let her stand in front of her family and friends and make her announcement. Let her bask in whatever complicated mix of congratulations and judgment that followed. And then, when she thought she'd gotten away with it, when she'd convinced everyone that this was just one of those things that happen, when she'd rewritten the narrative to make herself the victim, or the brave woman choosing happiness, or whatever story she decided to tell, then I would reveal what I knew, and 3 weeks was plenty of time to make sure I knew everything. I turned on my laptop and opened a fresh document, titled it Timeline. And I began to write. The day after Christmas, I went back to work. Not to school winter break wouldn't end for another week, but to my real work now, the project that had become my singular focus, understanding the complete architecture of Sarah's betrayal. I started with the financial records. Our joint accounts were easy enough to access from my laptop. Years of managing our household finances meant I had all the passwords, knew where every statement was filed, could track every transaction we'd made together. I opened spreadsheets and began sorting through the past year of charges, looking for patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. September 17th, $247 at an upscale boutique downtown. I remembered that purchase. Sarah had said she needed professional clothes for a conference. I'd encouraged her to get whatever she needed. September 23rd. $180 at a restaurant I'd never heard of. When I looked it up, I found it was one of those intimate French places with candlelight and a dress code. Sarah had told me she was working late that night. Emergency budget meeting. October 3rd. $89 at a lingerie store. The expensive kind, the kind that came in black boxes with tissue paper. I'd never seen any of it. October 15th. $450 at a hotel in the city. Our city. The city we both lived in. She'd told me she was going to visit her college roommate that weekend. I'd stayed home and graded papers and fixed the leaking faucet in the guest bathroom while my wife checked into a hotel 30 minutes away and did God knows what with a man who signed her paychecks. The spreadsheet grew longer. Each entry was a small betrayal, a moment when she'd looked at me and chosen deception. Dinner at expensive restaurants became team meetings. Spa days became client presentations. A weekend trip to a resort upstate became a professional development retreat. I documented everything, created a separate sheet just for suspicious charges. By noon, I had identified 47 transactions over the past 4 months that didn't match the explanations Sarah had given me. 47 lies. 47 times, she'd looked me in the eye and told me a story I'd believed because I'd wanted to believe it. Because doubting her would have meant doubting everything, and I hadn't been ready for that. I was ready now. My phone buzzed. I'd turned it back on an hour ago, and the messages had started immediately. Sarah, mostly, but also David, her brother, and surprisingly, Amanda, his wife. I opened Amanda's message first. Michael, I don't know what's going on, but Sarah's not telling us the whole story. I can tell. If you need someone to talk to, someone who's not going to automatically take her side, I'm here. I stared at that message for a long time. Amanda had married into the family 5 years ago, had always seemed slightly outside the tight circle of Patricia, Robert, Sarah, and David. She was kind, observant, the type of person who noticed when things didn't add up, and apparently, things weren't adding up. I typed back, "Thank you. I'm okay. Just need some time to think. Please, don't worry about me." Her response came within seconds. "I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about what Sarah did to make you leave on Christmas Eve." So she suspected. Probably couldn't prove anything, but her instincts were telling her what her husband's family wasn't ready to acknowledge, that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain in this story. I didn't respond to that. Didn't confirm or deny. Just let her sit with her suspicions the same way I was making everyone else sit with their uncertainty. Next, I called the school district's HR department. Left a message explaining that I needed to discuss my benefits and insurance coverage. Could someone please call me back after the holiday? It was a fishing expedition. I needed to know what would happen to our shared health insurance if we separated, whether Sarah's pregnancy would be covered under my plan or hers, what the timeline looked like for making changes. Details. I needed all the details. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I looked at Sarah's social media. Her Instagram was public. A carefully curated collection of inspirational quotes, photos from work events, and the occasional picture of us together, always perfectly filtered and captioned with some variation of "grateful for this life." The comments were always the same: heart emojis and "you two are goals" and "relationship envy." If they only knew. I scrolled back through the past 6 months, looking at the photos with new eyes. There, a company outing in October. Sarah in a sundress I'd never seen before. Marcus's hand on her shoulder in a way that might have been professional but probably wasn't. The caption, "Best team ever." September. A conference in Boston. Sarah holding a cocktail, laughing at something off camera. Marcus tagged in the photo but not visible. Caption, "Making connections and closing deals." A group photo from a client dinner. Sarah seated next to Marcus, their chairs close enough that their shoulders touched. Caption, "Celebrating success with the dream team." The evidence was everywhere, hiding in plain sight behind hashtags and filters and the performance of professional achievement. I took screenshots of everything, added them to my growing folder. By mid-afternoon, I'd built a timeline that showed the affair had likely started in August, right after Sarah's promotion. Right after Marcus had personally selected her for his executive team. Right after she'd come home glowing and told me this was everything she'd worked for, that Marcus saw her potential, that this was going to change our lives. He'd certainly changed our lives. I was so focused on my documentation that I almost missed the knock at my hotel room door. My first thought was that Sarah had somehow found me, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw David standing in the hallway, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable in the way people do when they're about to have a conversation they don't want to have. I opened the door. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Find my friend's app." He had the decency to look embarrassed. "Sarah added you to the family group last year for emergencies. This is an emergency?" "Mom thinks so." He shifted his weight. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around the sparse hotel room, the unmade bed, the laptop surrounded by papers, the half-empty coffee cup from this morning, and I could see him trying to understand what had driven his mild-mannered brother-in-law to spend Christmas in a hotel. "Sarah's losing it," he said finally. "She won't tell us what happened. Just keeps saying you left and won't answer her calls, and she doesn't understand why. Mom's threatening to drive to your school and talk to your principal, convince him to do a wellness check or something. Tell your mother I'm fine." "Are you?" David looked at me directly. "Because you don't seem fine, Michael. You seem like a guy who just blew up his life on Christmas Eve and doesn't know how to explain it." I almost told him then. Almost laid out the whole story, the conversation I'd overheard, the pregnancy, the affair, the 47 lies I'd documented just this morning. Almost asked him what he would do if it were Amanda who'd betrayed him. But I didn't. Because David was Sarah's brother first and my friend second. And anything I told him would get back to her within the hour. And I wasn't ready for her to know how much I knew, or what I was planning to do with that knowledge. "There are things you don't know," I said instead. "Things Sarah should tell you herself. So tell me, it's not my story to tell." "That's bullshit, Michael." His frustration was showing now. "You're part of this family. Whatever's going on, we can work through it. That's what families do. Some things can't be worked through." Jesus Christ. He ran a hand through his hair. "Did you cheat on her? Is that what this is about?" The question was so absurd, so completely backwards from reality, that I actually laughed. It came out sharp and bitter, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. "No, David, I didn't cheat on her." "Then what?" "Ask your sister." I walked to the door and opened it. "Ask her what she was planning to announce at Christmas Eve dinner. Ask her why I left, and ask her if she's ready to tell you the truth." David stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him running through scenarios in his head, trying to connect dots that Sarah had deliberately scattered. Then he nodded slowly and walked to the door. "She's my sister," he said, "but your family too, and I've never seen you like this. So whatever she did, I'm sorry, man." He left before I could respond. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. That had been too close to revealing everything before I was ready, before I had all the pieces in place. I needed to be more careful. The rest of the day I spent researching Marcus Westfield. If I was going to understand the situation fully, I needed to know who I was dealing with. His LinkedIn profile was impressive. MBA from Wharton, 25 years of executive experience, board member at 2 nonprofits, regular speaker at industry conferences. The picture of success. His personal Facebook was locked down, but his wife's wasn't. Diane Westfield, 53 years old, active in the local garden club, posted regularly about her 2 sons, one in medical school, one working in finance. Her most recent post, from 3 days ago, "Grateful for my wonderful family and the life we've built together. Merry Christmas." There were photos of their house, a sprawling estate in the most expensive neighborhood in the city. Photos of vacations to Italy, the Caribbean, Aspen. Photos of their anniversary celebration 2 months ago, 30 years of marriage, according to the caption. 30 years. And Marcus was throwing it away for a woman half his age and the excitement of a secret affair. Or maybe this wasn't the first time. Maybe Sarah was just the latest in a line of ambitious young women he'd taken under his wing and then into his bed. Maybe Diane had learned to look the other way. Or maybe she genuinely didn't know. Either way, she deserved to know now. But not yet. Not until I had everything documented, verified, ironclad. I made notes about Diane Westfield, added her information to my file, wondered if she'd thank me or hate me when this was all over. Probably both. My phone rang. I glanced at it, expecting Sarah, but the number was unfamiliar. I answered anyway. "Mr. Chen, this is Margaret Thornton. I received your message about potentially needing legal representation." The divorce attorney. I'd forgotten I'd reached out to her emergency line. "Yes," I said. "Thank you for calling back. I have some availability tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to come in for a consultation. No charge for the first meeting. We can discuss your situation, and I can explain your options." Tomorrow works. 3 o'clock? I'll be there. She gave me the address, an office building downtown, not far from where Sarah worked. The irony wasn't lost on me. After we hung up, I sat with that decision for a while. Calling an attorney made this real in a way nothing else had. It meant I wasn't just documenting Sarah's betrayal for my own clarity. I was preparing for war. But war implied two sides fighting. And I wasn't interested in fighting. I was interested in truth. In making sure that when this was over, everyone understood exactly what had happened and who was responsible. Let Sarah fight if she wanted to. Let her hire expensive lawyers and try to spin the narrative. I had something better than a good story. I had the facts. That evening, I finally read through all of Sarah's messages. There were over 100 now, spanning from Christmas Eve to this afternoon. I read them in order, watching her emotional state deteriorate with each one. The first messages were casual, confused, then worried, then frantic, then angry. "You have no right to do this. No right to just disappear and ignore me. We're married. We're supposed to talk through things." Then pleading, "Michael, please, whatever you think you heard, let me explain. I love you. I've always loved you. This is just a misunderstanding." Then, manipulative. "Your students are going to hear about this. Your colleagues. Everyone will know you abandoned your wife at Christmas. Is that really the man you want to be?" And finally, sent just an hour ago, "Fine. If you won't talk to me, you can talk to my lawyer. You want a divorce? You'll get one. But don't expect this to be easy. I have rights too." There it was. The truth, finally cutting through all the performance. She wasn't sorry. She was angry that I'd disrupted her plan, that I'd refused to play my assigned role in her narrative. And now she was threatening me with lawyers and public humiliation and the dissolution of our marriage as if it were a weapon she was wielding rather than a consequence of her own choices. I saved every message, added them to my documentation, marveled at how quickly love could transform into threat when someone realized they weren't in control. I composed a single response, carefully worded. "I'll be happy to discuss this through attorneys. Have yours contact me once you've retained someone. Until then, all communication should go through legal counsel, professional, detached." The language of someone who'd already moved past emotional response into strategic action. I sent it and immediately blocked her number. Then, I blocked Patricia's number, and Robert's, and even David's, though I felt a twinge of guilt about that one. I kept Amanda's number active, and I added Margaret Thornton's to my contacts. The old Michael would have agonized over these decisions, would have second-guessed himself, worried about being too harsh, too cold, too unforgiving. This Michael understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is create boundaries that can't be crossed. I ordered dinner from the Chinese restaurant down the street, the same one I'd eaten at on Christmas. The woman at the counter recognized me. "Back again?" she asked, smiling. "Guess I liked the dumplings." "Or you've got nowhere else to be." I didn't argue with her assessment. I ate alone in my hotel room, reviewing my documentation, making lists of questions to ask the attorney tomorrow, planning my next steps. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Each piece of evidence I cataloged was another brick in the foundation of my case. Some people process grief through tears, others through rage. I was processing mine through spreadsheets and timelines and the careful accumulation of facts. It felt right. It felt like control in a situation where everything had been spinning wildly out of my grasp. At 11 p.m., I received an email. Not from Sarah, from Marcus. Mr. Chen. I apologize for reaching out directly, but I believe we need to have a conversation about what you overheard on Christmas Eve. There's been a significant misunderstanding, and I'd like the opportunity to clarify the situation before any hasty decisions are made. I understand you're upset, but I assure you the context of that conversation was not what you think. Sarah values your marriage deeply, as do I respect the institution of marriage in general. This can all be resolved amicably, if we approach it rationally. Please call me at your earliest convenience so we can discuss this man to man. Respectfully, Marcus Westfield. I read it 3 times, analyzing every word choice, every subtle manipulation. Significant misunderstanding. As if I'd misheard. I'm 3 weeks pregnant for my boss. Sarah values your marriage, present tense, as if it still existed. Man to man. The language of masculine solidarity, suggesting we were on the same team, that we could work this out between ourselves without involving messy things like emotions or consequences. It was a masterclass in corporate manipulation, and I'd been teaching persuasive rhetoric long enough to recognize every technique he was deploying. I forwarded the email to myself at 3 different addresses, added it to my documentation, saved it in multiple formats. And then I replied, Mr. Westfield, all communication regarding this matter should go through legal counsel. I'm sure someone in your position understands the importance of proper channels. M. Chen. Short. Professional. Giving him nothing to work with. I hit send and closed my laptop. Tomorrow I'd meet with the attorney. Tomorrow I'd start understanding the legal landscape of divorce and custody and asset division. Tomorrow I'd take the next step in transforming my documentation into action. But tonight, I let myself feel it. The anger, the grief, the betrayal, the strange, cold satisfaction of knowing I was handling this the right way, not the emotional way, not the explosive way, but the strategic way that would ensure Sarah and Marcus couldn't manipulate the narrative or gaslight me into questioning what I'd heard. I'd been a teacher for 20 years. I knew how to build a case, how to present evidence, how to guide people to conclusions through facts rather than emotions. And I was about to teach Sarah and Marcus the most important lesson of their lives. Actions have consequences, and silence is the most powerful response to lies. Margaret Thornton's office occupied the 14th floor of a glass building that reflected the winter sky in shades of gray and silver. I arrived 15 minutes early, sat in the waiting room surrounded by leather furniture and abstract art, and watched other people's marriages end in real time. A woman in her 60s emerged from one of the consultation rooms, eyes red but posture straight, clutching a folder of documents like a shield. A man about my age sat across from me, bouncing his leg nervously, checking his phone every 30 seconds as if the answers to his situation might arrive via text message. We were all here for the same reason. All trying to untangle our lives from people who'd promised forever and then changed the terms without permission. Mr. Chen? Margaret Thornton was exactly what her website suggested. Mid-50s, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, a handshake that conveyed both competence and compassion. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and when she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. This was a woman who'd seen every variation of betrayal humanity could devise. I followed her into a consultation room that overlooked the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a conference table that could seat 8, boxes of tissues strategically placed at both ends. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice," I said. "That's what the emergency line is for." She gestured to a chair and took her own seat across from me, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Why don't you tell me what brought you here?" So I did. I told her about Christmas Eve, about the conversation I'd overheard, about Sarah's pregnancy with her boss's child, about the 47 documented lies in our financial records, about Marcus's email trying to spin this as a misunderstanding. I told her about our 23 years of marriage, the house we owned together, the life we'd built, about my teaching salary versus Sarah's executive compensation, about the fact that I'd been the one managing our finances while she focused on her career with Marcus. Margaret took notes, her pen moving steadily across the legal pad, her expression neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, reviewing what she'd written. "You've been very thorough," she said finally. "The documentation you've gathered will be extremely valuable. I'm a teacher. Research is what I do. Most people come in here emotional, reactive. They want revenge. They want to hurt their spouse as badly as they've been hurt." She looked up from her notes. "But that's not what I'm seeing from you. What is it you want, Mr. Chen?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that question. What did I want? "I want the truth on record," I said slowly. "I want everyone who thinks they know our story to understand what really happened. I want Sarah to face the consequences of her choices without being able to rewrite history or play the victim, and I want to walk away from this with my dignity intact and my finances protected. Not revenge. Revenge implies I'm doing something to her. I'm not. I'm just making sure she can't do anything more to me." Margaret smiled, and this time it did reach her eyes. "You're going to be an excellent client, Mr. Chen. Let's talk about your options." For the next 90 minutes, she walked me through the landscape of divorce in our state, the waiting periods, the division of assets. The fact that Sarah's pregnancy, even with another man's child, didn't automatically disqualify her from spousal support, though the adultery would certainly factor into the court's decision. "Infidelity isn't the automatic win people think it is," Margaret explained, "especially in no-fault divorce states, but it does matter when it comes to asset division and support calculations. The fact that she used marital funds to conduct an affair, those restaurant charges, the hotel stays, that's called dissipation of marital assets. We can argue she should reimburse you for that. How much are we talking about?" She did some quick calculations based on the numbers I'd provided. Conservatively, around $15,000 over the past 4 months, possibly more if we dig deeper. $15,000. Sarah had spent $15,000 of our money on her affair while I'd been clipping coupons and turning down dinner invitations with friends because I thought we needed to save. "There's also the matter of the house," Margaret continued. "It's in both your names. You've been married long enough that the appreciation in value will be considered marital property, regardless of who made the down payment or larger mortgage contributions. I've made every mortgage payment for the past 3 years. Sarah's salary increased, but she said she was maxing out her 401k. Was she? I pulled up the spreadsheet I'd created, showed her the retirement account balances. Sarah's 401k contributions had stayed exactly the same since her promotion, the standard company match, and nothing more. "Where did that extra income go?" Margaret asked. "According to our joint account, nowhere. She must have opened a separate account." Margaret made a note. "We'll need to subpoena her financial records. If she's been hiding assets, that's going to work very much in your favor." We talked about custody, though there were no children to fight over. We talked about retirement accounts and pension benefits. We talked about whether I wanted to pursue a fault-based divorce, which would take longer but might give me additional leverage, or a no-fault divorce based on irreconcilable differences. "What I'd recommend," Margaret said, "is that we file for legal separation first, 6 months minimum before the divorce can be finalized anyway. During that time, we gather evidence, depose witnesses if necessary, and build the strongest case possible. Meanwhile, you maintain the moral high ground. No dating, no social media posts, no public confrontations. You document everything, and let her make mistakes while the clock runs." She's already threatening to make this difficult. They always do. But here's what most people don't understand about high-conflict divorces. The person screaming the loudest usually has the most to hide. She leaned forward slightly. "Your wife is pregnant with her married boss's child. When this becomes public knowledge, and it will, she's going to face professional and social consequences that have nothing to do with what happens in divorce court. The optics alone could damage her career. Marcus's too, for that matter. You think I should tell his wife?" "I think you should let your attorney handle communications with third parties. But yes, Mrs. Westfield has a right to know what her husband has been doing. And when she files for her own divorce, That's two families publicly dealing with the fallout of Marcus and Sarah's choices. The weight of what she was suggesting settled over me. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about triggering a series of dominoes that would reshape multiple lives. Is that wrong? I asked. Going after him too? Margaret's expression softened slightly. Mr. Chen, your wife made vows to you. She broke them. That's between you and her. But Marcus Westfield is in a position of power over her professionally. He's married. He engaged in an affair with a subordinate, got her pregnant, and is now trying to manage you like you're another business problem to solve. That's not just personal misconduct. That's potentially actionable professional misconduct. His wife deserves to know. His company might need to know. Those aren't revenge. Those are natural consequences. I thought about Diane Westfield's Facebook posts, her garden club photos, her pride in 30 years of marriage. How do we tell her? Carefully, compassionately, with documentation so she doesn't think it's a vindictive ex-spouse making wild accusations. Margaret made another note. I have a colleague who specializes in these situations. She can reach out to Mrs. Westfield, provide evidence, offer support. Make it clear, this information is coming from a place of respect for her right to know, not from a desire to cause pain. When? After we file for separation. Once the legal process is in motion and your intentions are clear, that way it can't look like you're using this information as a threat or leverage. We discussed timelines, strategy, the choreography of dismantling a marriage while protecting my interests and maintaining my integrity. By the time we finished, I had a folder full of documents to sign, a retainer agreement that would cost me $5,000 up front, and a plan that extended 3 weeks into the future. 3 weeks. The same amount of time Sarah had been pregnant. The symmetry felt intentional, like the universe was giving me a deadline. One more thing, Margaret said as I stood to leave. You mentioned Sarah was planning to announce the pregnancy at Christmas Eve dinner. Do you know if she went through with it? I don't know. I haven't spoken to anyone in her family except her brother, and he didn't mention it. Find out, because if she announced it without telling them about the affair, if she's letting people believe you're the father, she paused. That's fraud, and it gives us additional leverage. I nodded, adding it to my mental list of things to investigate. You're doing the right thing, Margaret said at the door. I know it doesn't feel that way. I know this probably feels calculated and cold, but you're protecting yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. Your wife made her choices. You're allowed to make yours. I left her office feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had a plan, a professional guiding me through the legal maze. Heavier because that plan involved deliberate steps that would hurt people, not just Sarah and Marcus, but Diane Westfield, Sarah's parents, maybe even colleagues and friends who'd gotten caught in the blast radius of this affair. But Margaret was right. These weren't consequences I was imposing. These were consequences Sarah and Marcus had created through their own actions. I was just making sure those consequences landed where they belonged. I walked back to my hotel through the cold afternoon, past holiday decorations that hadn't been taken down yet, past couples walking hand in hand, past the coffee shop where Sarah and I had our first date 25 years ago. The nostalgia tried to grab me, tried to make me remember the good times and question whether I was throwing away something worth saving. But then I thought about the conversation I'd overheard. The joy in Sarah's voice when she'd talked about being pregnant for Marcus. The ease with which she'd planned to announce it, surrounded by her family, probably expecting me to stand beside her and smile and accept whatever story she'd concocted. That woman wasn't the Sarah I'd married. Or maybe she was, and I'd just never seen it clearly before. Back at the hotel, I found an email from David waiting for me. Michael, I talked to Sarah like you suggested. Asked her what she was planning to announce at Christmas Eve dinner. She got defensive, said you'd misunderstood something, that you were being paranoid and controlling. Then she started crying and said you'd abandoned her during the happiest time of her life. I don't know what to believe anymore. Mom and Dad are taking her side, saying you're going through some kind of crisis. But Amanda pulled me aside and said she thinks Sarah's lying about something big. Are you really not going to tell me what happened? David. I read it twice, feeling the weight of his confusion. David had always been caught between loyalty to his sister and genuine affection for me. We'd bonded over sports and dad jokes, and the shared experience of navigating Patricia's complicated expectations. But he was Sarah's brother, and when it came down to it, blood would win over friendship. I typed a careful response. David, I appreciate you reaching out. I know this is hard for you, but Sarah knows exactly what she did, and she's choosing to lie about it rather than face the consequences. That's her decision. When the legal proceedings start, everything will become clear. Until then, I need you to respect that I'm doing what's best for me, even if I can't explain all the details right now. Take care of Amanda. She's got good instincts. Michael. I sent it and felt the door close on another relationship. David would choose Sarah. They all would, at first, until the evidence made choosing her impossible. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my own family. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright with surprise. Michael, we weren't expecting to hear from you until New Year's. How was Christmas with Sarah's family? My parents lived in Arizona now, retired and content in their small community of other retirees who'd fled the northeastern winters. We talked every few weeks, sent cards on birthdays and holidays, maintained the kind of comfortable distance that happens when everyone's lives are settled and unremarkable. Mom, I need to tell you something. The brightness in her voice faded. What's wrong? I told her. Not everything, not the 47 lies, or the legal strategy, or the plan to contact Marcus's wife, just the core truth. Sarah was having an affair with her boss. She was pregnant with his child. I'd left on Christmas Eve and wasn't going back. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, oh, Michael. Just that. Just my name. Spoken with the kind of sadness mothers reserve for moments when they can't fix what's broken. I'm sorry you have to deal with this, she continued. Are you okay? Where are you staying? A hotel for now. I met with a divorce attorney today. I'm handling it. You shouldn't have to handle this alone. Your father and I can fly out. No. Mom, I appreciate it, but I need to do this myself. I just wanted you to know before you heard it from someone else. Does Sarah's family know? They know I left. They don't know why. Sarah's not telling them the truth. Of course she isn't. My mother's voice hardened. I never liked her, you know. Never said anything because you seemed happy, but I always thought she was cold, calculating. The way she'd smile at you but look through you at the same time. I'd never heard my mother say anything negative about Sarah in 23 years. The revelation that she'd been harboring these observations, these judgments, all while maintaining perfect civility at family gatherings, it was its own kind of shock. You never said anything. What could I say? You loved her. You'd made your choice. A mother learns to keep her mouth shut about her son's wife, even when every instinct is screaming that something's not right. We talked for another hour. She told me stories I'd never heard before. Times when Sarah had been dismissive or rude when I wasn't around. Moments when my mother had felt like an outsider at our wedding planning or home purchases or holiday celebrations. Small things that had added up to a portrait of a woman who saw my family as obligations rather than relationships. I'm proud of you, my mother said finally, for leaving, for not staying out of some misplaced sense of duty or shame. You deserve better than someone who treats you like you're disposable. After we hung up, I sat in the dark hotel room and processed this new information. My mother had seen through Sarah from the beginning, had watched me build a life with someone she didn't trust, and had said nothing because she'd respected my autonomy. How many other people had seen what I'd missed? How many friends, colleagues, family members had noticed the cracks in our marriage and chosen silence over honesty? Or had they tried to tell me, in subtle ways I'd refused to hear? I pulled out my laptop and opened my email, scrolled through years of messages from friends who'd stopped inviting us to couples events, from colleagues who'd asked how things were at home with a careful tone that suggested they suspected the answer wasn't fine, from Sarah's own friends who'd gradually stopped reaching out to me, directly. The signs had been everywhere. I'd just been too invested in the story of our happy marriage to read them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Diane Westfield. I believe we need to talk." My heart stopped. How did she get my number? How did she even know who I was? I stared at the message for a full minute before another one came through. "I know about Marcus and your wife. I've known for 2 months. I've been gathering evidence for my own divorce. We should compare notes." 2 months. She'd known for 2 months and hadn't said anything. Had been playing the same quiet game I was playing. Now documenting, planning, waiting for the right moment. I called Margaret Thornton's emergency line. She answered immediately. "What happened?" "Marcus's wife just texted me. She says she's known about the affair for 2 months. She wants to compare notes." "Don't respond yet. Forward me the messages. I need to think about this strategically." I did as she asked, then sat in the dark waiting for her to call back. When she did, her voice was thoughtful. "This changes things. If Mrs. Westfield has been documenting the affair from her end, she might have information you don't. But we need to be careful. Anything you tell her could potentially be used in her divorce proceedings, and vice versa. We need to coordinate this properly. What do you suggest?" "Let me reach out to her attorney, assuming she has one. We'll set up a meeting where everyone's counsel is present. Keep it professional and protected. In the meantime, send her a brief, polite response acknowledging her message and saying you'll have your attorney coordinate a meeting." I typed the message while Margaret stayed on the line. "Mrs. Westfield, I've asked my attorney to reach out to yours so we can arrange a proper meeting. I appreciate you reaching out. Simple, professional, giving nothing away." Diane's response came within seconds. "Smart. My attorney will expect the call. And Mr. Chen, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Nobody deserves that." I showed the message to Margaret over the phone. "She's being careful too," Margaret observed. "Good. That means we can work with her without it devolving into emotional chaos. I'll make the calls tomorrow and set something up for next week." After we hung up, I sat with this new development. Diane Westfield had been playing the long game just like me, had been watching her husband betray 30 years of marriage while she quietly built her case. We were allies in a war neither of us had asked for. And together, we might just be unstoppable. The meeting with Diane Westfield was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon at Margaret's office, 5 days away. 5 days of sitting with the knowledge that Marcus's wife had been watching, documenting, planning her own exit strategy while maintaining the perfect facade of marital contentment. I spent those days doing what I did best, teaching myself everything I could about the situation I was in. I researched alienation of affection laws in our state, even though they'd been abolished decades ago. I read case studies about executive misconduct and affairs with subordinates. I looked into whether Sarah's company had policies about romantic relationships between supervisors and direct reports they did, requiring disclosure to HR within 30 days. Sarah had been promoted to Marcus's team in August. It was now late December. If the affair had started when I suspected, they'd been violating company policy for months. I documented that too. I also started paying attention to patterns I'd previously ignored. Like how Sarah had suddenly become interested in fitness in September, joining an expensive gym downtown and going every morning at 5 a.m. I'd thought she was finally taking her health seriously. Now I wondered if those early morning workouts had been early morning meetings with Marcus. I called the gym, claimed I was interested in membership, asked about their hours. They opened at 5:30 a.m., but the executive locker rooms available only to premium members had 24-hour keycard access. I checked our credit card statements. Sarah had upgraded to premium membership in September. $700 for 3 months. $700 for the privilege of having a private space where she could meet her married boss before the sun came up. I added it to my spreadsheet. The number of documented expenses related to her affair had climbed to 63. On Monday evening, Amanda texted me. "David told me what Sarah said about you being paranoid and controlling. I wanted you to know I don't believe it. I've known you both for 5 years, and you're the least controlling person I've ever met. Whatever's really going on, I'm on your side." It was the first time anyone from Sarah's family had explicitly taken my side, and the relief was unexpected. I'd been prepared to fight this battle completely alone, to be villainized and misunderstood and judged by people who only had Sarah's version of events. but Amanda saw through it. I texted back, "Thank you. That means more than you know. The truth will come out soon. Just please take care of yourself and David. This is going to get messy." Her response was immediate. "I'm pregnant. Found out yesterday. Haven't told anyone yet because Sarah's being so weird about everything, and I don't want to make it about me, but I wanted you to know. Pregnant." Amanda was pregnant. And she was holding back her joy, her announcement, because Sarah had somehow made the entire family dynamic about her own crisis. The irony was almost funny. Almost. "Congratulations," I typed. "That's wonderful news. Don't let Sarah's drama take away from your happiness. You deserve to celebrate." "Thanks, Michael. That actually really helps." I sat with that conversation for a long time. Amanda was pregnant with a child she and David wanted, planned for, would raise together. A child that would be celebrated without secrets, or shame, or betrayal hanging over it. Sarah was pregnant with her married boss's child, lying to everyone about it, manipulating her family into taking her side while she prepared to blow up multiple lives. The contrast was stark. Tuesday arrived cold and gray, the kind of January afternoon that makes you forget summer ever existed. I dressed carefully, the same charcoal suit I wore to parent-teacher conferences, a tie Sarah had given me 3 anniversaries ago, shoes I'd polished the night before. I looked like a man who had his life together. That was important. Margaret's office at 2 p.m. I arrived early again, sat in that same waiting room, and tried to imagine what Diane Westfield would be like. Would she be angry? Broken? Vindictive? Would she blame me somehow for not keeping Sarah in line, as if wives were possessions that men were supposed to control? At 2:15, the elevator doors opened, and a woman stepped out who redefined every assumption I'd made. Diane Westfield was stunning. Not in the obvious way Sarah was pretty. Sarah had always been conventionally attractive, the kind of looks that photographs well and turns heads in restaurants. Diane was something else. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob, elegant in a way that suggested old money and good breeding, a navy suit that probably cost more than my car payment, and eyes that were absolutely glacial. She saw me immediately, walked over with the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years as a corporate executive's wife and knew exactly how much power that position carried. "Mr. Chen?" She extended her hand. Diane Westfield. Her handshake was firm. Her wedding ring, a massive diamond, surrounded by smaller stones, caught the light and sent rainbow fragments across the waiting room wall. "Mrs. Westfield, thank you for agreeing to meet. Please, call me Diane. We're about to become very well acquainted, I think." Her attorney arrived moments later, a woman named Patricia Wynn, who had the same sharp competence Margaret radiated. They greeted each other like old colleagues, which they probably were. The world of high-stakes divorce law was apparently a small one. We were ushered into a larger conference room this time. Margaret at one end of the table, Patricia at the other, Diane and I sitting across from each other in the middle like negotiators at a peace summit. Except we weren't negotiating peace. We were coordinating war. "Let's establish some ground rules," Margaret began. "Everything discussed in this room is confidential unless we all agree otherwise. We're here to share information that might be mutually beneficial, not to create additional liability for either party. Understood?" We all nodded. "Diane," Patricia said, looking at her client, "why don't you start by sharing what you know?" Diane opened a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Inside were documents, photographs, printed emails. The evidence of a marriage ending, organized with the precision of someone who'd spent decades managing household affairs and social calendars. "I first suspected something was wrong in September," she began, her voice steady and emotionless. "Marcus started coming home later. He'd always worked long hours, but this was different. He was distracted, happy in a way that had nothing to do with our life together. I knew that feeling. Had lived it from the other side. I checked our credit card statements, found charges at hotels, restaurants we'd never been to. He said they were client dinners, but when I asked which clients, he got defensive, told me I was being paranoid. The same words Sarah had used with David, paranoid, as if suspecting the truth was a character flaw rather than pattern recognition. Then in October, he took a weekend trip, said it was a conference in Boston. I called the hotel. They had no record of a conference, no corporate rate, just a premium suite booked under his name for 2 nights. She slid a hotel receipt across the table, October 15 to 17. The same weekend Sarah had told me she was visiting her college roommate. I pulled out my phone, showed them the charge on our credit card statement. Same dates, different hotel, same city. They were in Boston together, Margaret said quietly. And they were stupid about it, Diane added, something like satisfaction creeping into her voice. Marcus has always thought he was smarter than everyone else. It never occurred to him that I'd check his receipts, that I'd track his phone, that I'd hire a private investigator. You hired an investigator? I asked. In November, after I found a text he'd forgotten to delete. It was from someone named Zveri Original. The message said, "Last night was perfect. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore." She paused. The investigator confirmed Marcus was having an affair with Sarah Chen, his VP of Strategic Development. Got photos of them entering hotels together, leaving her apartment at dawn, having dinner at restaurants where they thought they wouldn't be recognized. She slid a folder across to me. I opened it slowly, not sure I wanted to see what was inside. But I needed to see it, needed the visual confirmation to match what I already knew intellectually. The photos were damning. Sarah and Marcus at outdoor cafes, his hand covering hers on the table. Walking into a boutique hotel in the business district, her arm linked through his. Sitting in his car in a parking garage, clearly arguing about something. And the worst one of them, on Sarah's apartment balcony. Wait, Sarah's apartment? I looked up at Diane. You didn't know? She seemed genuinely surprised. She's been renting a studio in the Pearl District since September. $1,400 a month, according to the investigator. Listed under her maiden name. $1,400 a month, for 5 months. $7,000 of our money, my money, from the joint account I'd been carefully managing spent on an apartment I didn't know existed. An apartment where she could meet Marcus without worrying about neighbors who knew me. Where she could keep clothes and toiletries and probably gifts he'd given her. Where she could live the life she was building with him, separate from the life she was still pretending to have with me. I didn't know, I said quietly. Margaret was already making notes. That's significant. We can trace those payments. Prove she was using marital funds for the apartment. There's more, Diane said. She pulled out what looked like medical records. I have access to our insurance statements. Marcus added Sarah to our family plan in October as a domestic partner. It's a benefit his company offers for unmarried couples. The insurance company sent the confirmation to our home address. He didn't think I'd read it. He put her on your insurance? The audacity was breathtaking. Oh, it gets better. In early December, there was a claim, prenatal care, first OB visit. I called the doctor's office, said I was calling on behalf of my husband's insurance to verify the claim. They confirmed Sarah Chen was a patient, due date approximately August 15th. August 15th. I did the math backwards. Conception would have been mid-November. 3 weeks ago, when I'd overheard, the conversation would have been just after she'd confirmed the pregnancy. Just after she'd had her first ultrasound and seen proof of what she and Marcus had created. No wonder she'd been planning to announce it at Christmas. She'd probably thought the timing was perfect, everyone gathered together, celebrating, unable to make a scene without ruining the holiday. She'd drop her bombshell and expect everyone to swallow their shock and offer congratulations because that's what polite people do at family gatherings. But I'd heard her practicing, heard the joy in her voice, and I'd left before she could execute her plan. What are you going to do with all this? I asked Diane. I'm filing for divorce next week, she said simply. 30 years of marriage, and I'm done. Marcus can have his pregnant girlfriend and the shitstorm that's about to rain down on both of them. Patricia leaned forward. We're also preparing to notify Marcus's company about the affair and the policy violations. The relationship should have been disclosed to HR. The fact that he's in a direct supervisory position over Sarah, that he added her to his insurance without proper authorization, that he's used company resources to facilitate the relationship, all of that could constitute grounds for termination. You're going to get him fired? I tried to keep my voice neutral. I'm going to make sure his employer knows what he's been doing, Diane corrected. What they do with that information is up to them. But Marcus has been with that company for 15 years. He's 2 years from full pension vesting. If they terminate him for cause. She smiled, and it was cold. Well, that's a consequence he should have considered before he started fucking his subordinate. The bluntness was shocking coming from this elegant woman with her perfect hair and expensive suit, but I understood it. Understood the anger underneath the ice. We spent the next hour comparing notes. Diane had dates and times I didn't have. I had financial records she hadn't been able to access. Together, we built a timeline that showed the affair had started in late August, intensified through September and October, and resulted in pregnancy in mid-November. 3.5 months of sustained, deliberate betrayal. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, a whole relationship, carefully constructed and maintained, while both of them went home to their spouses and pretended everything was fine. There's one thing I need to know, I said to Diane. When you found out, why didn't you confront him immediately? Why wait 2 months? She looked at me with those glacial eyes, and for the first time I saw something human beneath the ice. Because I learned a long time ago that information is power, she said, and the person who acts first from emotion loses. I needed time to document everything, to move assets he didn't know I could access, to secure my position, to make sure that, when I finally told him I knew, there was nothing he could do to spin it or minimize it, or make me question my own perception of reality. She paused, then added more softly, and because I needed time to grieve the marriage I thought I had, before I could accept the marriage, I actually had. Don't you? I did. That's exactly what these past 10 days had been, a private mourning period for the life I'd believed in and the woman I'd thought Sarah was. What about the baby? I asked. Have you thought about what happens when it's born? That's Sarah's problem, not mine, Diane said. Marcus won't be in a position to provide the lifestyle he promised her. Not when I'm finished with him. She's going to be a single mother, raising her married boss's child, probably unemployed, when the company lets her go for the same policy violations, trying to explain to her family how she ended up here. That baby is a consequence she's going to have to live with. There was no sympathy in her voice. No concern for an innocent child being born into this mess. Just cold calculation about how Sarah's pregnancy would become her punishment. I should have felt satisfied, should have appreciated Diane's ruthlessness on my behalf. But instead, I felt hollow. Because somewhere in all of this strategy and documentation and careful planning for revenge, there was going to be a baby. A child who didn't ask to be conceived in betrayal, who would grow up knowing their existence had destroyed multiple families. I know what you're thinking, Diane said, watching my face. You're thinking about the child, feeling sorry for it, aren't you? No, she said it flatly. I spent 30 years raising Marcus's children, put my career on hold, managed his household, played the perfect corporate wife while he built his empire. I gave him everything, and he repaid me by screwing someone half his age and getting her pregnant. That baby? That's his karma made flesh, and I hope every time he looks at it, he remembers everything he threw away. The room was silent for a moment. Even the attorneys seemed taken aback by the venom in her voice. But I understood it. Understood how betrayal could transform love into hate, how years of devotion could curdle into bitterness when you realized it had all been one-sided. I just hoped I wouldn't become that bitter, that whatever happened next, I could walk away with my humanity intact. So, what's the timeline? Margaret asked, breaking the silence. When do we move? Patricia consulted her notes. Diane files for divorce next Monday. We notify Marcus's company on Tuesday, giving them the weekend to process. That should trigger an internal investigation. I file Michael's separation papers on Wednesday, Margaret added. By then, Sarah will already be dealing with the fallout from Marcus's situation. She won't have time to craft a narrative. And I send the evidence to her family? I asked. If you want to, Margaret said, but you don't have to. The truth is going to come out whether you tell them or not. The question is whether you want to control how they hear it. I thought about Patricia and Robert, about David and Amanda, about Christmas Eve dinner and the announcement Sarah had been planning to make. I want them to hear it from me, I decided. But not yet. Let Sarah sit with her secrets a little longer. Let her keep pretending everything's fine while the walls close in. Diane smiled approvingly. You learn fast. We finalized our plan, coordinated our attorneys, agreed to share any additional evidence we discovered. By the time the meeting ended, we'd built an alliance that would systematically dismantle both our marriages and possibly 2 careers in the process. As we stood to leave, Diane touched my arm. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you got caught up in this. You seem like a good man. You deserve better than what she did to you. So do you. Yes, she said simply. I do. We walked out of that conference room as allies, united by betrayal and the quiet fury of people who'd been underestimated. The countdown had begun. 1 week until Diane filed. 2 weeks until I filed. 3 weeks until everyone went pale when they learned the truth. I drove back to my hotel through the winter darkness, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something other than grief, or anger, or shock. I felt ready. Ready to stop being the victim of someone else's choices. Ready to become the architect of my own next chapter. Ready to watch Sarah's carefully constructed lies crumble under the weight of documented truth. The ending was coming. And this time, I was writing it. The days after meeting Diane, Westfield moved with the strange duality of time, when you're waiting for something inevitable, both too fast and excruciatingly slow. I returned to my hotel room that Tuesday night and sat in the dark, processing what I'd learned. Sarah had an apartment I didn't know about. She'd been living a double life so complete it had its own address, its own monthly rent payment, its own key that I'd never seen on her keychain. How many nights had she told me she was working late when she was actually 30 minutes across town in her studio apartment, maybe with Marcus, maybe alone, building a life that had no space for me in it. I pulled up rental listings for the Pearl District, found buildings that matched the address from Diane's investigator report. Sleek, modern high-rises with floor-to-ceiling windows and amenities like rooftop lounges and fitness centers, the kind of places young professionals lived when they wanted to project success. Sarah was 45 years old enough to know better, old enough to understand consequences, but she'd chosen this anyway. I spent Wednesday doing something I'd been avoiding. I went back to our house. The drive felt surreal. I'd been gone for less than 2 weeks, but the Colonial, with its neat lawn and Christmas wreath, still on the door, felt like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. The American Dream, circa 2024. Note the 2-car garage and the mortgage that seemed reasonable at the time. Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway. She was at work, probably, or at her apartment, or with Marcus. Did it even matter anymore where she was when she wasn't with me? I let myself in through the front door. The house smelled stale, like no one had opened a window in days. Mail was piled on the entry table, mostly bills and holiday cards from people who still thought we were happily married. I sorted through it methodically, looking for anything that might be useful. A credit card statement for an account I didn't recognize. I opened it carefully. The account was in Sarah's name only, opened in September. The charges told a story I already knew, but seeing it itemized made it visceral. Hotels, restaurants, a jewelry store, purchase for $1,800, lingerie, flowers sent to an address I now recognized as her apartment. She'd been buying him gifts, decorating her secret life with tokens of affection purchased with money from our joint account that she'd been transferring into this private one. I photographed every page, added it to my documentation. In the kitchen, I found evidence of recent occupation. A coffee cup in the sink, crumbs on the counter, the trash can half full. Sarah had been here, but not living here. Just stopping by, maybe to keep up appearances, or grab clothes, or check for mail that might reveal her secrets. I went upstairs to our bedroom. The bed was made with military precision. Sarah's habit, not mine. I'd always been the one who left it rumpled and warm. On her nightstand was a bottle of prenatal vitamins. The label said they'd been filled 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. Right around the time I'd heard her in the sunroom, talking to Marcus about the pregnancy. She'd been taking vitamins for a baby that wasn't mine while sleeping in a bed we'd shared for 23 years. The closet told another story. Half of Sarah's professional wardrobe was missing the suits and blouses and designer shoes she wore to impress clients and colleagues. But her casual clothes, her weekend wear, most of that was still here. Like she'd separated her life into public and private, taking only what she needed for the performance of being Marcus's sophisticated partner. I found the lingerie drawer. It was nearly empty, just the practical pieces, sports bras, everyday underwear. All the lace and silk and expensive pieces that used to make me wonder when she'd gotten so fancy, all of that was gone. Moved to her apartment, probably. Worn for someone else's appreciation. I took photos of the empty drawer, added them to my documentation. In the study, my study, really, where I graded papers and planned lessons. I found my desk had been disturbed. Papers I'd left in neat stacks were shuffled. My filing cabinet was slightly open. Sarah had been looking for something. I checked my files. Everything related to our finances was still there, but it had clearly been reviewed. She'd been trying to understand what I knew, what evidence I might have gathered. Too late. I'd already copied everything. The originals were just decoys now. I was about to leave when I heard the front door open. My heart jumped. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Wasn't prepared to see her face to face after everything I'd learned, but I couldn't hide. This was still my house, too. I walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately, and found Sarah standing in the foyer, frozen in the act of hanging up her coat. She looked terrible. Not physically, she was still beautiful in that polished, professional way, but her eyes were haunted. Dark circles suggested she hadn't been sleeping. Her hand trembled slightly as she lowered it from the coat hook. Michael. My name came out like a question and an accusation at once. Sarah. We stood there, 10 feet apart, and I could see her calculating, trying to decide what approach to take. The crying wife, the angry spouse, the confused victim. She went with concerned. I've been so worried. You just disappeared. You won't answer my calls or texts. Your mother won't tell me where you are. What's going on? You know exactly what's going on. I really don't. She took a step closer. You left on Christmas Eve without explanation. You've been hiding ever since. Everyone thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. Is that what you told them? I told them the truth, that you overheard something you didn't understand and ran away before I could explain. The audacity of it, the sheer fucking audacity. What exactly did I misunderstand, Sarah? I kept my voice level, conversational. When you said you were 3 weeks pregnant for your boss, when you told Marcus he was about to be a father, what part of that did I not understand correctly? She paled, actually went white, like I'd slapped her. You heard that? Every word. You and Marcus in the sunroom, planning your announcement, talking about how tired you were of keeping secrets. Michael! She reached for me, and I stepped back. Don't, please. Just let me explain. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I asked. Are you not pregnant? Is it not Marcus's baby? Did you not rent an apartment where you've been living a separate life for the past 4 months? Which part am I confused about? Her eyes widened. How do you know about the apartment? The private credit card? The hotel stays in Boston? The $1,800 you spent on a gift for him? I smiled, and it felt cruel. I know everything, Sarah. Every lie, every charge, every moment you looked me in the eye and chose deception. She was crying now. Real tears, I thought. Though with Sarah, it was always hard to tell what was genuine and what was performance. I never meant to hurt you, she sobbed. It just happened. Marcus and we connected on a level I didn't expect. And yes, I should have told you sooner. Should have been honest. But I was scared. Scared of this exact reaction. You were scared I'd be upset that you were cheating on me? I was scared you'd make it impossible for me to be happy. The tears stopped, just like that. And underneath them was anger I'd never seen before. You have no idea what it's like, Michael. Being married to someone who's content with mediocrity, who's happy teaching high school and coaching basketball and living the same small life year after year. Mediocrity. Yes. She was yelling now. You have no ambition, no drive. You could have gone into administration, could have gotten your doctorate, could have done something more with your life. But you're happy being Mr. Chen, the history teacher, and I'm supposed to be happy being married to that? The words hung between us, ugly and honest. This was the truth then. Not that she'd fallen in love with Marcus, not that it just happened, but that she'd looked at the life we'd built together and found it beneath her. Found me beneath her. When did you start feeling this way? I asked quietly. Does it matter? It matters to me. She laughed, bitter. Years, Michael. Years of watching you turn down opportunities because you liked your little teaching job. Years of listening to you talk about your students and your team like they were the center of the universe. Years of going to faculty parties where everyone talked about lesson plans and grading curves while I was closing million-dollar deals. So you found someone more impressive, someone with ambition and drive, someone who matched your professional success. Yes, is that so wrong? To want a partner who understands the world I live in? He's married, Sarah. Not for long. Diane's filing for divorce. The slip was unintentional. I could see it in her eyes the moment she realized what she'd revealed. You know about Diane, I said. Marcus told me she hired a detective. Found out about us. She's trying to destroy him out of spite. Out of spite? Sarah, he's been married to her for 30 years. He got you pregnant while wearing her wedding ring, and you think she's the one acting out of spite? You don't understand their marriage. It's been over for years. They were just going through the motions. I'd heard that line before. Every cheater's justification. The marriage was already dead. We were just living together. There was no real betrayal because the relationship wasn't real anyway. Never mind that Diane's Facebook showed 30 years of genuine partnership. Never mind that she'd just found out 2 months ago and was still processing the destruction of her entire adult life. What about our marriage? I asked. Was that over too? Or were you just going through the motions with me while building something real with him? Sarah's silence was answer enough. I loved you, I said, and my voice cracked on the past tense. For 23 years, I loved you, and you're standing here telling me it was mediocre, that I was mediocre, that everything we built together wasn't enough, because I was content being a teacher instead of chasing some corporate ladder you think matters. Michael, I'm filing for separation. The words came out steady now. My attorney will contact you next week. We'll divide assets equitably. You'll get your share of the house, the retirement accounts, everything we built together. But I want you to understand something. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see my reflection in her eyes. You didn't trade up. You traded a man who loved you for a man who was willing to risk everything for the thrill of an affair. And when the thrill is gone and you're just his pregnant girlfriend who cost him his marriage and possibly his career, you're going to realize what you gave up. Not because I'm special, but because what we had was real. And what you have with him is built on lies. You don't know anything about what we have. I know his wife has been documenting your affair for 2 months. I know she has photos, receipts, medical records. I know she's planning to notify his company about the policy violations. And I know that in about a week, your fairy tale is going to collide very hard with reality. Sarah's face went through several emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, calculation. You've been working with Diane. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. You're trying to destroy us. No, Sarah. I'm making sure you can't destroy me anymore. What happens to you and Marcus is a consequence of your own choices. She stared at me for a long moment. Then quietly, I am pregnant, you know, with his child. That's real. And we're going to have this baby and build a life together, no matter what you or Diane or anyone else does. Then I hope it makes you happy. I genuinely do, because it cost you everything else. I walked past her, headed for the door. Michael, wait. I stopped, but didn't turn around. What about my family? Are you going to tell them? I'm going to tell them the truth. What they do with it is up to them. They'll hate me, maybe, or maybe they'll surprise you. Either way, It's not my responsibility to manage their reaction to your choices. When? Her voice was small now. When are you going to tell them? When I'm ready. I left her standing in the foyer of the house we'd bought together, surrounded by the life she'd decided wasn't enough. I drove back to the hotel in a daze. The confrontation had been both exactly what I'd expected and nothing like I'd imagined. I'd thought seeing her would hurt more, thought hearing her admit the affair would break something fundamental inside me, but instead, I felt liberated. Because she'd confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe, that she didn't just cheat on me with Marcus. She'd looked at our entire marriage and found it wanting, found me wanting, and she'd made her decision based on that judgment. There was no saving this, no couples counseling or second chances or working through it. She didn't want to work through it. She wanted Marcus and the life he represented, and she was willing to burn everything else to have it. Fine. Let her have him. Let her have the baby and the apartment and the expensive lifestyle she thought she deserved. I would take my mediocre teaching job and my small life and my contentment with simple things, and I would build something new, something honest, something that didn't require me to be anyone other than who I was. Back at the hotel, I called Margaret and told her about the confrontation. She knows Diane is filing, I said. Did she say when Marcus told her? No, just that Diane hired a detective and is trying to destroy him. Interesting. So Marcus knows his wife knows, and instead of trying to salvage his marriage, he's positioning himself as the victim. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That's actually helpful. When Diane files, he can't claim he was blindsided. He knew what was coming. What about Sarah threatening to make this difficult? Let her. The more aggressive she is, the worse she looks, especially once the pregnancy becomes public knowledge and people start doing the math. We talked through next steps. Margaret would file separation papers the following Wednesday, exactly 1 week from now. In the meantime, I was to avoid contact with Sarah unless absolutely necessary, to document any attempts she made to reach me, and gather any final pieces of evidence I might need. You did well today, Margaret said. Staying calm, not getting drawn into an argument. That's exactly the approach you need to maintain. After we hung up, I sat in the dark hotel room and let myself feel the weight of what had just happened. I'd confronted Sarah, heard her admit that our marriage had been a disappointment to her, and I'd walked away without breaking. That had to count for something. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. David just told me Sarah came home crying. Said you ambushed her at the house and accused her of terrible things. I told him I don't believe it. Are you okay? So Sarah was already spinning the narrative, making herself the victim of my cruelty. I typed back, I'm fine. I went to the house to get some things. Sarah was there. We talked. I told her I was filing for separation. That's all. Did she do something? Something that made you leave? I stared at that question. Amanda was giving me an opening, a chance to tell the truth before Sarah could bury it under layers of lies. But not yet. Not like this. Not over text, when the revelation deserved better. Yes. I typed simply. But the full story needs to be told in person. Soon. I promise. Okay. I trust you. And I'm here when you're ready. I set my phone aside and opened my laptop. Pulled up the folder labeled Documentation. Inside were hundreds of files, now photos, receipts, timeline spreadsheets, transcribed messages, investigator reports from Diane, medical records, credit card statements. The complete architecture of Sarah's betrayal, organized and indexed and ready to be presented. 1 week until Diane filed, and Marcus's world started to crumble. 1 week until I filed and made my intentions legally binding. 3 weeks until the truth reached everyone who needed to hear it. The countdown continued, and I was ready for whatever came next. Outside my hotel window, snow started to fall, soft, silent, covering the city in white, like the world was resetting, giving everyone a chance to start fresh. I watched it accumulate on the street below and thought about beginnings and endings, about how sometimes they're the same thing. My marriage was ending. My life was beginning. And somewhere between those two truths, I was learning who Michael Chen really was, when no one was asking him to be anything else. The answer surprised me. I was stronger than I'd thought. Calmer, more strategic, capable of playing the long game when everything in me wanted to react, to rage, to make them hurt the way they'd hurt me. But revenge wasn't rage. Revenge was patience. And I'd learned patience from 20 years of teaching teenagers that actions have consequences, even when those consequences take time to arrive. Sarah and Marcus were about to learn that lesson themselves. Class was in session, and the final exam was coming. Monday morning arrived with a kind of crystalline clarity that follows a snowstorm. The city looked cleaner, sharper, like someone had turned up the contrast on reality. I woke early, showered, dressed in my best suit. Today was the day Diane filed for divorce. And even though I wouldn't be there, even though it was her battle to fight, I wanted to mark the occasion somehow. Wanted to acknowledge that this was the moment everything changed, from theoretical to actual. At 9 a.m., I received a text from Patricia Nguyen. Papers filed. Marcus being served at his office at 10. Thought you'd want to know. At his office. In front of colleagues and subordinates. The humiliation was deliberate, and I had to admire Diane's precision. She could have had him served at home, privately. But she'd chosen to make his professional life and personal life collide in the most public way possible. I imagined the scene: Marcus in his executive office, maybe in a meeting, a process server walking in with legal documents. The confusion, then recognition, then panic, as he realized his wife wasn't bluffing, wasn't negotiating. She was ending it. And somewhere in that same building, Sarah would hear about it, would realize that the protective bubble she and Marcus had built around their affair had just popped. I spent the morning at a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, appearing to grade papers but actually refreshing my email every few minutes. Margaret had said she'd update me once she heard from Patricia. At 10:47, my phone rang. Margaret, "It's done," she said. Marcus was served. According to Patricia's investigator, who was stationed outside the building, he came out about 20 minutes later, got in his car, and drove to Sarah's apartment. How did they know about the apartment? Diane provided the address. She's been thorough. What happens now? Patricia is sending a letter to Marcus's company this afternoon, outlining the affair, the policy violations, the insurance fraud, adding Sarah as a domestic partner while she was legally married to you. The company will have to investigate. And given Marcus's position, given that Sarah reports directly to him, they're going to have to act. How fast? Corporate investigations move slowly, but this is pretty clear-cut. I'd estimate they'll place both of them on administrative leave by the end of the week while they investigate. Termination will depend on what their employment contracts say. But, she paused, this isn't going to end well for either of them professionally. After we hung up, I sat with that information. By the end of the week, Marcus and Sarah could both be unemployed. Sarah's VP salary, the income she'd been so proud of, the career she'd built, all of it at risk, because she couldn't keep her personal and professional lives separate, or because she'd chosen not to. At noon, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Michael, it's Robert, Sarah's father." His voice was clipped, angry. "We need to talk." "Hello, Robert." "Don't." "Hello, Robert, me." What the hell is going on? Sarah just called Patricia hysterical, saying that her boss's wife filed for divorce and is making wild accusations about an affair. She says you've been working with this woman to destroy her career. So Sarah was already spinning the narrative, making herself the victim of a conspiracy rather than the architect of her own destruction. Is that what she told you? She said you've lost your mind, that you've convinced yourself she's having an affair based on some conversation you misunderstood, and now you're trying to ruin her life out of spite. And you believe her? "I believe my daughter is in distress, and her husband abandoned her at Christmas. I believe you owe us an explanation." The anger in his voice was real. He genuinely thought I was the villain here, that I'd manufactured this crisis to hurt Sarah for some imagined slight. "Robert, has Sarah told you she's pregnant?" Silence. Long enough that I thought he might have hung up. "What? Has Sarah told you she's 3 weeks pregnant?" That she's been seeing her boss, Marcus Westfield, since August? That she rented an apartment so they could meet without anyone knowing? That she's been using our joint account to finance the affair while telling me she was working late? That's absurd. Sarah wouldn't. I have bank statements, credit card receipts, photos from a private investigator, medical records showing she's listed as Marcus's domestic partner on his insurance. And I have witnesses who heard her talking about the pregnancy on Christmas Eve, planning to announce it at your dinner table. More silence. Why would she do that? Why would she risk everything for... You'd have to ask her. But Robert, I'm not the one who's lying. I'm not the one who destroyed our marriage. I'm just the one who's refusing to pretend it didn't happen. If this is true, his voice had lost some of its certainty. If even half of what you're saying is true, then why didn't you tell us? Why just disappear? Because it wasn't my story to tell. Because I needed time to process what my wife had done before I had to manage everyone else's reactions. And because Sarah should have been the one to tell you the truth, not me. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing, recalculating. Send me the evidence, he said finally. What? If you have proof of what you're claiming, send it to me. I need to see it with my own eyes. Robert, send it, Michael. Because if you're telling the truth, then my daughter has been lying to all of us. And if you're lying, then I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. The threat was clear, but so was the opening he was giving me. I'll send you what I have. But Robert, when you see it, when you realize I'm telling the truth, please remember that I didn't want any of this. I wanted a marriage, a partner, a life. Sarah's the one who chose differently. Just send the evidence. He hung up. I sat in the coffee shop, my heart pounding, and considered what I was about to do. Once I sent Robert those files, there was no taking it back. Sarah's family would know. The judgment would fall. And whatever relationship I had left with any of them would be filtered through the lens of Sarah's betrayal. But he'd asked for the truth, and I'd promised myself I would tell it. I created a new folder, selected the most damning evidence, bank statements showing the apartment payments, credit card charges from hotels and restaurants, photos from Diane's investigator showing Sarah and Marcus together, the insurance documents proving she was listed as his domestic partner. I left out anything too personal, too intimate, just the facts. I wrote a brief email. Robert, attached is the documentation you requested. I've included financial records, photographs, and official documents. Everything is dated and verified. I know this is painful to see. I know you want to believe Sarah wouldn't do this. I wanted to believe it too. But the evidence speaks for itself. I'm filing for legal separation this Wednesday. My attorney will handle all communication going forward. But I wanted you to hear the truth from me first, since you asked. I'm sorry it came to this. Michael. I attached the files and hit send before I could second-guess myself. 3 minutes later, my phone rang again. David this time. Dad just forwarded me your email, he said without preamble. Tell me it's not real. Tell me you fabricated this somehow. I didn't fabricate anything. Jesus Christ, Michael. His voice cracked. How long have you known? I overheard her on Christmas Eve, talking to Marcus about the pregnancy. I've been documenting everything since then. And you didn't think to tell me? To tell any of us? Would you have believed me without evidence? Or would you have done exactly what Robert did? Assumed I was crazy or lying or having a breakdown? He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. Amanda was right, he said finally. She kept saying something didn't add up. That Sarah's story about you being paranoid didn't make sense. I told her she was being ridiculous. Amanda has good instincts. She's going to say, I told you so for the rest of our lives. A pause. How are you doing? Really? The question surprised me. In all of this, almost no one had asked how I was doing. Just demanded explanations. Accused me of overreacting. Questioned my version of events. I'm surviving, I said honestly. Taking it one day at a time. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry she did this to you. I'm sorry we didn't believe you. I'm sorry it took photographic evidence to convince us you weren't the problem. You're her brother. I understand. Yeah, well, right now I'm not feeling very brotherly. I'm feeling like my sister is a stranger, and I don't know who she's been for the past few months. Another pause. Amanda's pregnant. Did she tell you? She did. Congratulations. We were going to announce it at Christmas, but Sarah was acting so weird, and then you disappeared, and Amanda said it didn't feel right to make it about us when something was clearly wrong. Now I know why. Don't let Sarah's choices take away from your joy. You and Amanda deserve to celebrate. Thanks, man. His voice was rough. Listen, I know things are going to get messy. The divorce, the lawyers, all of it. But you're still family to me, okay? Whatever happens with Sarah, that doesn't change. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd been braced for rejection, for Sarah's family to close ranks around her. Having David explicitly choose to maintain our relationship meant more than I could articulate. That means a lot, I managed. After we hung up, I checked my email. Robert had replied to my message with 2 words. Call me. I did. I'm looking at these photos, he said when he answered. His voice sounded older than I'd ever heard it. My daughter, with a married man, looking at him the way she used to look at you. I'm sorry, Robert. Don't apologize to me. You're not the one who should be apologizing. A long breath. Patricia is devastated. She keeps saying she raised Sarah better than this, that we must have failed somewhere as parents. This isn't about how Sarah was raised. This is about choices she made as an adult. Is she really pregnant? According to the medical records Diane obtained, yes, due in August. And she was going to tell us on Christmas Eve? With you standing right there, let us think it was yours? That's what it sounded like when I overheard her planning it with Marcus. Jesus Christ. The profanity sounded wrong coming from Robert, who prided himself on old-fashioned manners. What kind of person does that? I didn't have an answer. Michael, I need you to know something, Robert continued. I said some harsh things to you earlier, accused you of lying, of trying to hurt Sarah. I was wrong. I'm sorry. You were protecting your daughter. I understand. No, I was being a stubborn old fool who assumed his daughter could do no wrong. Patricia always said I put Sarah on a pedestal, that it wasn't healthy. I thought she was being overcritical. Turns out, she was right. We talked for another 20 minutes. He asked questions about the timeline, the apartment, the money Sarah had spent. Each answer seemed to age him further, like he was watching his daughter transform from the person he thought he knew into someone unrecognizable. What happens now? He asked finally. I file for separation on Wednesday. The divorce process starts. Sarah and I divide our assets and move on with our lives. And the baby? That's Sarah's responsibility, not mine. Cold words from a man who wanted children. We tried for 5 years, I said quietly. 5 years of disappointment and tests and treatments that went nowhere. Sarah said she was okay with it being just us. Said we'd build a different kind of life. And now she's pregnant with someone else's child within months of deciding she wanted more than what I could give her. I didn't know you'd tried for children. Sarah didn't want anyone to know. Said it was private. Guess she had her reasons for keeping that quiet. Robert was silent for a long moment. I'm going to talk to her, make her explain herself. And Michael, whatever you need during this process. A place to stay, someone to talk to, help with legal costs, you ask. Your family. That hasn't changed. It was the second time that day someone from Sarah's family had said those words, and it broke something loose inside me that I'd been holding tight since Christmas Eve. Thank you, I whispered. After we hung up, I sat in that coffee shop and cried. Not dramatic sobs or rage or the kind of crying that draws attention. Just silent tears running down my face while I stared at my laptop screen and processed the fact that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. David and Robert were choosing to stand with me. Amanda had seen through Sarah's lies from the beginning. Even Patricia, according to Robert, was devastated by what her daughter had done. The family I'd thought I was losing was fracturing along different lines than I'd expected. That evening, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize. Jennifer Hartwick, VP of Human Resources at Marcus's company. Mr. Chen, We received information today regarding a relationship between Marcus Westfield and Sarah Chen that may constitute violations of our company policies. As part of our investigation, we'd like to speak with you about your knowledge of this relationship and any relevant details you can provide. Would you be available for a phone call tomorrow afternoon? We understand this is a sensitive matter and appreciate your cooperation. Sincerely, Jennifer Hartwick. I forwarded the email to Margaret with a note. Should I talk to them? Her response came within minutes. Yes, but I'll be on the call with you. Forward me the HR rep's contact info. This could strengthen your case significantly. The company was moving faster than expected. Someone in their legal department must have seen the exposure they were facing. A COO having an affair with a subordinate, insurance fraud, policy violations. They were probably terrified of a lawsuit. Good. They should be. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in the hotel bed watching headlights track across the ceiling, thinking about dominoes falling and consequences arriving, and the way truth has its own momentum once you stop trying to control it. Diane had filed for divorce. Robert and David knew the truth. The company was investigating, and in 2 days, I would file my separation papers and make my intentions legally binding. The storm I'd been watching gather on the horizon was finally here. And Sarah, who'd spent months building her secret life while thinking she was so clever, so untouchable, was about to discover what happens when all your lies get exposed at once. I thought about her sitting in her apartment, the one I'd been paying for without knowing it existed, probably with Marcus, both of them trying to figure out how to salvage their situation. But there was no salvaging this. The damage was done. The truth was out. And all the spin in the world couldn't change the basic facts of what they'd done. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Please call me. We need to talk. I can explain everything. Just give me a chance. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain, and no conversation left to have. Instead, I opened my documentation folder and added the email from HR. Robert's acknowledgement that he'd seen the evidence. David's message about still considering me family. The file was nearly complete now. Every piece of evidence organized, every lie documented, every betrayal cataloged and verified. In the morning, I would talk to HR and provide whatever information they needed for their investigation. On Wednesday, Margaret would file my separation papers. And then, finally, after 3 weeks of careful planning and quiet strategy and patient documentation, everyone would know the whole truth. Not Sarah's version. Not Marcus's spin, just the facts, presented clearly and irrefutably. I was ready. The teaching career Sarah had called mediocre had prepared me well for this. 20 years of breaking down complex historical events into clear narratives. 20 years of showing students how to trace cause and effect. 20 years of proving that documentation beats emotion every time. Sarah and Marcus had created the cause. Now came the effect. And I was going to make sure it was exactly what they deserved. The call with HR was scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. Margaret joined from her office, while I sat in my hotel room with my laptop open. Documentation organized into folders, with clinical labels, financial records, timeline, third-party evidence, communications. Jennifer Hartwick introduced herself with the careful neutrality of someone trained to navigate corporate liability. She was joined by 2 others, Alan Brennan from legal and someone named Carla, whose title was Chief Compliance Officer. Their voices were professional, distant, treating this like any other investigation rather than the implosion of 2 careers. Mr. Chen, thank you for making yourself available. Jennifer began. We want to be respectful of your time and your privacy. We're gathering information about a potential policy violation and your cooperation would be helpful. I understand, I said. Can you confirm that you're married to Sarah Chen, currently VP of Strategic Development at our company? I am, though I've filed for legal separation as of this morning. That had been Margaret's first task today, filing the papers, making it official. The marriage is ending. I see. And can you tell us when you first became aware of a relationship between your wife and Marcus Westfield? I walked them through it. Christmas Eve. The overheard conversation. The subsequent investigation I'd conducted. I kept my tone factual, unemotional. like I was presenting a research paper rather than the destruction of my marriage. "And you have documentation of this relationship?" Alan from legal asked. "Extensive documentation. Financial records showing expenditures related to the affair. Credit card statements from a private account my wife opened without my knowledge. Rental agreements for an apartment she maintained separately. Photographs from a private investigator hired by Mr. Westfield's wife." "You've been working with Mrs. Westfield?" Carla's voice sharpened with interest. "Our attorneys coordinated a meeting. We both have an interest in understanding the full scope of the relationship between our spouses. Margaret had coached me on this part. Don't volunteer information, but don't hide it either. Let them ask questions and answer truthfully, without editorializing." "Mr. Chen," Jennifer said carefully, "were you aware that Mrs. Chen was listed as a domestic partner on Mr. Westfield's insurance plan?" "Not until Mrs. Westfield's attorney provided that documentation. I had no knowledge that my wife had been added to another family's insurance while still legally married to me." I could hear typing on the other end, someone taking notes, probably flagging that detail for their legal team. "And the pregnancy?" Alan asked. "Can you confirm that Mrs. Chen is pregnant?" "According to medical records and her own admission, yes. She's approximately 3 weeks along. The conception date would have been mid-November." More typing. "Has Mrs. Chen claimed that you are the father of this child?" The question landed like a stone. This was the heart of their concern, I realized. Not just the affair or the policy violations, but the potential fraud if Sarah had been letting people believe I was the father while using company insurance for prenatal care. "She hasn't explicitly claimed that to me," I said slowly. "But she was planning to announce the pregnancy at a family gathering on Christmas Eve, and given the circumstances, the implication would have been that I was the father. I left before she could make that announcement." "But she has since announced this pregnancy to colleagues?" Carla asked. "I don't know what she's told her colleagues. You'd have to ask her." "We will," Jennifer said, and something in her tone suggested that conversation would not go well for Sarah. They asked more questions about the timeline of the affair, about specific expenses I documented, about whether I had any direct evidence of sexual contact. I didn't, but the investigators' photos and the pregnancy itself spoke clearly enough. After 45 minutes, Jennifer thanked me for my cooperation and assured me they took these matters seriously. "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll complete our investigation, interview the relevant parties, review the documentation, and then we'll make determinations about appropriate actions consistent with our policies and legal obligations." Corporate speak for, "We're going to destroy their careers, but we can't tell you that directly." After we hung up, Margaret called me back immediately. "That went well," she said. "They're building a case for termination. Did you hear how specific their questions were about the insurance fraud? That's criminal exposure, not just policy violation." "Criminal?" "Sarah knowingly provided false information to obtain insurance benefits she wasn't entitled to. That's fraud. The company could refer it to prosecutors if they want to protect themselves from liability." I sat with that. Sarah could face criminal charges. Not just a divorce, not just professional consequences, but actual legal prosecution. "Will they?" I asked. "Probably not. They'll more likely just terminate her and Marcus, make them repay any insurance claims, and move on. But the threat will be there, and it gives you additional leverage in the divorce proceedings." That evening, Robert called again. "I spoke to Sarah," he said without preamble. "Told her I'd seen your evidence. Asked her to explain herself. And?" She cried. "Said you'd taken everything out of context. That yes, she'd gotten close to Marcus, but it wasn't what it looked like. That the pregnancy was complicated, and I wouldn't understand." He paused. Then I asked her point blank, "Whose baby are you carrying?" And she couldn't answer me, Michael. Just cried harder, and said I was being cruel. "I'm sorry you had to do that." "Don't be. I'm her father. It's my job to hold her accountable, even when it's painful." A heavy breath. "Patricia is insisting we stage some kind of intervention, get everyone together and force Sarah to tell the truth. I told her, absolutely not. The last thing we need is more family drama while this is all playing out legally. Probably wise. David told Amanda everything. She apparently said, I knew it about 40 times. Now she's worried about stress affecting her pregnancy and won't talk to Sarah at all. The ripples were spreading. Sarah's betrayal wasn't just destroying her marriage, it was fracturing her entire family support system. How's Patricia handling it? I asked. She's in denial. Keeps saying there must be some explanation, that Sarah wouldn't throw away her marriage and her integrity for an affair. I showed her the photos, and his voice cracked. She just stared at them and said, that's not my daughter. Like if she doesn't acknowledge it, it won't be real. I understood that impulse. I'd done the same thing in the beginning, trying to find explanations that made Sarah less culpable, less deliberately cruel. Give her time, I said. The truth has a way of becoming undeniable. Michael, I need to ask you something. Robert's voice shifted, became more formal. When all this is over, when the divorce is final, and Sarah moves on with her life, are you going to be okay? The question surprised me. Eventually, I think so. You deserve better than what she did to you. You know that, right? You're a good man, a kind man, and she took advantage of that. I'm learning not to see kindness as a weakness. It's not a weakness. It's a strength she didn't deserve. After we hung up, I sat in the hotel room and thought about kindness and strength and the difference between being patient and being a doormat. I'd spent 23 years being patient with Sarah, patient with her long hours, her ambition, her need for professional success. I'd thought that patience was love, that supporting her career was what a good husband did. But there was a line between support and enabling, between patience and allowing yourself to be taken for granted. Sarah had crossed that line, and I'd been too kind to notice. Wednesday morning, I woke to an email from Margaret. Separation papers filed. Sarah will be served today. Are you prepared for the response? I typed back, as prepared as I can be. At 11:30 a.m., my phone started ringing. Sarah's number. I declined the call. She called 6 more times in rapid succession, each one going to voicemail. I didn't listen to the messages. Then came the texts. You filed for separation without even trying to work this out. After 23 years, I deserve a conversation at least. This is so typical of you, Michael. Running away instead of fighting for us. You're gonna regret this. I promise you that. Answer your phone. I forwarded all of them to Margaret with a note. Evidence of harassment? Her response? Keep them coming. The more aggressive she gets, the worse she looks. At 2 p.m., David texted. Sarah just called me sobbing. Said you served her with divorce papers at work, in front of everyone, deliberately humiliating her. Please tell me that's not true. I called him. She was served at work? I asked. That's what she said. Process server showed up at her office. Everyone saw. She's mortified. David, I didn't choose where she got served. The process server goes to the address on file. If she'd rather have been served somewhere private, maybe she should have come home instead of avoiding the house we bought together. Fair point. A pause. She's claiming you're trying to destroy her career out of revenge. Her career is being destroyed by her own choices. I just documented them. The company put her on administrative leave today, pending investigation into policy violations. So it was happening. HR had moved fast. And Marcus? I asked. Same. They're both suspended. Full pay for now, but if the investigation confirms what everyone already knows. He trailed off. This is really happening, isn't it? She's really going to lose everything. She made her choices. These are the consequences. I know. I keep remembering my little sister, the one who used to follow me around when we were kids, who wanted to be a lawyer because she thought she could change the world, who was so excited when she met you because she'd finally found someone who believed in her. His voice was heavy with grief for the sister he'd thought he knew. What happened to her? He asked. When did she become someone who could do this? I don't know, David. Maybe she was always capable of it, and we just didn't want to see. That night, alone in my hotel room, I let myself think about that question. When had Sarah changed? Or had she always been this person ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, willing to sacrifice anything for what she wanted, capable of compartmentalizing betrayal into something justified? I thought about our early years, how driven she'd been even then, how single-minded about her career. I'd admired that about her, the clarity of her goals. But maybe I'd missed the warning signs. The way she'd cut off friends who weren't useful to her career. The way she'd talked about colleagues who'd made personal choices that slowed their professional advancement, getting pregnant, taking time off for family, prioritizing work-life balance. The subtle contempt in her voice when she'd said they were wasting their potential. I'd thought she was just passionate about success. Now, I wondered if I'd been married to someone who genuinely believed that achievement justified any cost. My phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You should know." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. Mr. Chen. My name is Rebecca Walsh. I worked with Sarah 3 years ago before I left the company to have my second child. I heard through mutual friends that you're getting divorced, and I thought you should know something. Sarah had an affair with another colleague back then. His name was Tom Preston. It lasted about 6 months before his wife found out and threatened to expose them both. Sarah ended it immediately, and Tom transferred to another office. I never said anything because it wasn't my business, but I always felt guilty for staying silent. I'm sorry you're going through this. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Maybe if I had, you would have known what kind of person she was capable of being. Rebecca. I read the email 3 times. 3 years ago. While we were still trying to have children, while I'd been consoling Sarah after each negative test, holding her while she cried about how unfair it was, promising we'd get through it together. She'd been having an affair. Marcus wasn't the first. He was just the first one who'd gotten her pregnant. I forwarded the email to Margaret with shaking hands, added a note. How do we verify this? And does it matter for the divorce? Her response came quickly. I'll have my investigator look into Tom Preston. And yes, it matters. Pattern of behavior suggests this isn't a one-time mistake. Makes her claims that you drove her to it much less credible. I sat in the dark hotel room and processed this new information. Sarah had done this before, had betrayed me before, and I'd never known, had never even suspected. How many times had she looked me in the eye and lied? How many late nights at the office had been meetings with Tom? How many business trips had been cover for their affair? The woman I'd married was a stranger, had always been a stranger. I'd just been too in love with my idea of her to see the reality. My phone rang. Patricia this time. Michael, I owe you an apology. Her voice was formal, strained. I spoke to Sarah this evening, pushed her to tell me the truth about everything. She finally admitted it. The affair, the pregnancy, all of it. I'm sorry you had to hear it from her that way. Don't apologize. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. Needed to know that you weren't exaggerating or misinterpreting. A long pause. She said you've ruined her life. That you've turned everyone against her and destroyed her career out of spite. And do you believe that? No. I believe she ruined her own life, and you're just refusing to help her hide it. Patricia's voice softened. I'm ashamed of her, Michael. Ashamed that I raised a daughter who could be so selfish, so cruel. And I'm sorry she did this to you. It's not your fault. Maybe not. But I keep wondering if I could have done something differently. If Robert and I pushed her too hard to succeed. If we made her think achievement was more important than character. Sarah made her own choices. You can't blame yourself for that. Thank you for saying that. She took a breath. Robert told you we consider you family. I want you to know I feel the same way. Whatever happens between you and Sarah, you'll always be welcome in our home. After all the calls, all the revelations, all the dominoes falling exactly as I'd planned, I finally broke. Not dramatically, not with rage or tears or the kind of emotional release that feels cathartic. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I'd been holding myself together through sheer will, and now, with Patricia's words still echoing in my ears, I could finally let go. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, and let myself grieve. Not just for the marriage I'd lost, but for the years I'd wasted loving someone who was never real. For the trust I'd given so freely to someone who treated it as weakness. For the life I'd thought we were building that had been a performance all along. And underneath the grief was something else. Something lighter. Relief. Because I was free now. Free from the exhausting work of maintaining a relationship with someone who saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. Free from the cognitive dissonance of knowing something was wrong, but not being able to name it. Free from the responsibility of managing Sarah's image and protecting her secrets. I had 3 weeks of careful documentation, strategic planning, and quiet determination behind me. 3 weeks of choosing myself, when everything in my history suggested I should choose her. And now, the truth was out. Not all of it there were still revelations to come, still people who needed to understand the full scope of what Sarah had done. But the foundation was laid, the evidence was compiled, the allies were positioned. The final act was approaching, and when it arrived, everyone would go pale. Not because I'd done anything vindictive or cruel, but because the truth, presented clearly and irrefutably, is more devastating than any revenge could ever be. Sarah had spent months building her secret life, had crafted careful lies and maintained elaborate deceptions, had probably thought she was so clever, so careful, so protected by her performance of the loving wife who was just working hard to build their future. But she'd forgotten something crucial. The truth doesn't need to be clever. It just needs to be documented. And I documented everything. 3 weeks after Christmas Eve, the date circled on my calendar with red ink, though I didn't need the reminder. Every morning I'd counted down, watching the investigation unfold, the dominoes fall, the carefully constructed lies crumble under the weight of documentation. Margaret called at 9 a.m. The company made their decision, both terminated, effective immediately. Both of them? Marcus for policy violations, abuse of authority, and insurance fraud. Sarah for the same, plus failure to disclose a relationship with her direct supervisor. They're offering severance contingent on signing NDAs, but the damage is done. So it was over. Sarah's VP position, the career she'd valued more than our marriage, gone. Marcus's executive role, his 15 years with the company, finished. Both of them unemployed because they couldn't keep their personal and professional lives separate. There's more, Margaret continued. Diane's investigator found evidence that Marcus has done this before, 2 other subordinates over the past decade. One of them received a quiet settlement when she threatened to sue for sexual harassment. Does Diane know? She does now, and she's furious. Apparently, Marcus convinced her he'd changed after the first incident, that it was a mistake he'd never repeat. A pattern, just like Rebecca Walsh's email had suggested about Sarah. These weren't isolated incidents or moments of weakness. They were character traits masquerading as mistakes. When's the family meeting? Margaret asked. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock at Robert and Patricia's house. Are you sure you want to do this? Sarah's been telling them her version for 3 weeks. That I'm vindictive. That I've destroyed her career out of spite. That the affair was my fault somehow because I wasn't ambitious enough. I paused. They deserved to hear everything, the full truth, not just the affair, but the previous one, the apartment, the lies, all of it. It's going to be brutal. The truth usually is. That evening, I went through my documentation one final time, organized it chronologically, printed the most damning pieces, created a presentation that would walk them through exactly what Sarah had done and when. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it because Sarah had spent 3 weeks painting me as the villain, and I was done letting her control the narrative. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. Are you really ready for tomorrow? Once you show them everything, there's no taking it back. I typed back, I know, but they asked for the truth. I'm going to give it to them. David and I will be there. For you, not for her. You should know that. The support meant everything. David and Amanda, Robert and Patricia, even Diane Westfield, who'd sent me a message yesterday. Good luck tomorrow. Make sure they understand who she really is. I spent the night, unable to sleep, running through what I would say, how I would present the evidence without seeming vindictive, how I would make them understand that every revelation, every documented lie, every piece of proof wasn't me trying to hurt Sarah. It was me protecting myself from being erased from my own story. The next morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully, khakis and a sweater, nothing too formal. This wasn't a trial. It was a family meeting where I would finally, after 3 weeks of strategic silence, tell my side. I arrived at Robert and Patricia's house at 1:45 p.m. The same house where I'd overheard Sarah planning her announcement. The same sunroom where my marriage had ended. David met me at the door. "She's already here, in the living room with Mom and Dad. She doesn't know you're coming." "Good." We walked through the foyer together. I could hear voices, Sarah's high and defensive, Patricia's soothing. They were discussing me, probably. Sarah spinning more lies, while Patricia tried to find some middle ground between supporting her daughter and acknowledging the truth. I stepped into the living room. Sarah saw me and went pale. Actually pale. All the color draining from her face. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, looking at her parents. "We invited him," Robert said firmly. "You've told us your version of events. Now Michael gets to tell his." "There's nothing to tell. He already showed you those photos." "There's more than photos," I said quietly. I set my folder on the coffee table. "A lot more." Patricia gestured to a chair. "Please, Michael, sit down." I did. Sarah remained standing, her arms crossed defensively, her eyes darting between me and her parents like she was calculating escape routes. 3 weeks ago, I began. I overheard Sarah in this house, in the sunroom, telling Marcus Westfield that she was 3 weeks pregnant with his child. That conversation ended my marriage. But what I've learned since then, that's what I need you to understand. I opened the folder, started pulling out documents. This is a rental agreement for an apartment Sarah's been maintaining since September. $1,400 a month from our joint account. I slid it across to Robert. "This is a credit card statement from a private account she opened without telling me. $63,000 in charges over 4 months. Hotels, restaurants, gifts for Marcus." Sarah was shaking her head. "You're twisting everything." "This," I continued, pulling out Rebecca Walsh's email, "is from a former colleague of Sarah's. It details an affair Sarah had 3 years ago with a man named Tom Preston. 6 months, while we were trying to have a baby." Patricia gasped. Robert's jaw clenched. "That's a lie," Sarah said desperately. "She's lying. I don't even know who." "I had it verified," I said calmly. "Tom Preston confirmed it. He's willing to provide a statement, if necessary." I laid out more evidence. The insurance fraud, the pattern of deception, the financial records showing she'd been siphoning money from our joint account for months. And finally, the timeline, the complete, documented timeline of every lie, every betrayal, every moment she'd looked me in the eye and chosen deception. When I finished, the room was silent. Sarah was crying, but they were angry tears now, not sad ones. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said quietly. "You were rewriting history, making me the villain. I just made sure they knew the truth. You were rewriting history. I had every right. I just made sure they knew the truth." Robert stood, his face harder than I'd ever seen it. "Sarah, I think you should leave." "Dad, leave. Now. Before I say something I can't take back." She looked at her mother. Patricia was staring at the documents spread across the coffee table, her expression shattered. "Mom?" Patricia didn't look up. "Your father's right. You should go." Sarah fled. And everyone who remained went pale as they absorbed the full weight of what she'd done. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, not a hotel room, not the house Sarah and I had shared, but a space that was entirely mine. 1 bedroom overlooking the river, hardwood floors, windows that caught the morning light. Small, simple, honest. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. The judge had sided with me on almost every point. Sarah was required to reimburse me for the apartment expenses, the affair-related charges, all of it. The house was sold, assets divided. She got her share, but it was considerably less than she would have received if she hadn't dissipated marital funds on her affair. Marcus's divorce from Diane had been even more brutal. She'd gotten the estate, most of the retirement accounts, and a settlement that would keep her comfortable for life. Marcus was living in a modest condo, unemployed, facing the reality that no company would touch an executive with his track record. Sarah had the baby 3 weeks ago, a girl. I knew this only because David had mentioned it in passing, careful not to give me details I hadn't asked for. She was living with her parents, unemployed, a single mother at 45, trying to explain to her daughter someday why her father wasn't around. Marcus had signed away his parental rights. Apparently, fatherhood lost its appeal when it came with actual responsibility instead of just the romantic fantasy of starting over with someone younger. I didn't feel satisfaction at their downfall, just a quiet sense that consequences had landed where they belonged. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. "Dinner tonight? We want to show you the nursery." Amanda and David had had their baby boy 2 months ago. They'd asked me to be godfather. I'd cried when they asked, understanding that they were choosing to keep me in their family despite everything. I texted back, "I'll be there at 6. The truth had changed my relationship with Sarah's family, but not destroyed it. Robert called me every few weeks, checking in. Patricia had apologized so many times I'd finally had to tell her gently that she could stop. Sarah's choices weren't her fault. David and Amanda had become closer friends than they'd ever been when I was married to Sarah. Sometimes tragedy reveals who your real family is. I walked to the window and looked out at the river. 6 months ago, I'd been sitting in a hotel room, documenting betrayal, planning strategy, preparing for war. Now I was standing in my own space, starting over, choosing peace. Margaret had called last week with news that Sarah was considering writing a book, her side of the story. She wanted to paint herself as the victim of a controlling husband and a predatory boss, caught between 2 men who wouldn't let her make her own choices. "Let her write it," I told Margaret. "The truth is documented. Anyone who wants to fact-check her narrative will find 47 bank statements that tell a different story." The doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery person with a package. "Michael Chen? That's me." He handed me a large envelope. I signed for it and carried it inside. Curious. The return address was Diane Westfield's attorney's office. Inside was a letter and a check. "Michael, the settlement with Marcus is final. As we discussed, I wanted you to have this half of what he paid for insurance fraud and misuse of company benefits. Your documentation made my case airtight, and I wanted to acknowledge that. More importantly, I wanted to thank you, not just for the evidence, but for showing me that responding to betrayal with strategy instead of emotion is possible. You handled everything with such grace and dignity. It gave me a model to follow. I'm moving to the coast, buying a small house with a garden, starting over at 53. If you ever find yourself out that way, dinner's on me. With gratitude, Diane." The check was for $75,000. I stared at it, then at her letter, and felt something shift. This money, Sarah's betrayal, transformed into opportunity. I could pay off my car, put a down payment on this apartment instead of renting, start a college fund for David and Amanda's son, turn consequences into new beginnings. That evening, sitting in David and Amanda's living room, holding their sleeping son, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Content. "You look different," Amanda observed. "Lighter. I feel lighter." "Any interest in dating yet?" David asked. "Because Amanda has like 6 friends she wants to set you up with." "David!" Amanda smacked his arm. I laughed. "Maybe eventually. Right now, I'm just learning to enjoy my own company." "That's healthy," Amanda said. Sarah never could be alone. Always needed validation from someone. It was true. Sarah had jumped from me to Marcus so seamlessly because she'd never learned to exist without external validation, without someone telling her she was extraordinary. I'd spent 6 months learning that I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough. I just needed to believe it myself. Later, driving home through the summer evening, I thought about Christmas Eve, about standing in that sunroom doorway, hearing words that ended my marriage, about the choice I'd made to leave quietly instead of confronting her, to document instead of react, to wait instead of explode. That choice had saved me. Not from pain, I'd felt plenty of that, but from becoming someone I wasn't, from letting betrayal transform me into someone bitter and broken. I'd chosen differently, and that choice had led me here to a new apartment, new friendships, a new understanding of what I deserved. I pulled into my parking space and sat in the car for a moment, watching the river flow past, constant and unchanging. Sarah had called me mediocre, said my life was small. She'd been wrong. My life was intentional, built on truth instead of performance, rich with genuine relationships instead of transactional ones, grounded in character instead of achievement. And when I walked into my apartment that night, my space, my fresh start, my honest foundation, I understood something fundamental. The best revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you. It's building a life so honest, so genuine, so true that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Sarah and Marcus had their consequences, their careers gone, their reputations damaged, their fantasy exposed as the destructive selfishness it had always been. I had something better. I had myself back. And 3 weeks after Christmas, when everyone had gone pale learning the truth, I discovered that freedom doesn't come from someone else's downfall. It comes from choosing integrity when betrayal gives you every excuse to abandon it. I'd made that choice, and I would make it again every single day. Because that's not mediocrity, that's strength.